Perfect. Okay, good morning, everyone. Thank you all for waking up early and taking time out of your classroom day to sit and share with us. We're going to try to make this as quick and easy as possible. We are adjusting some of what we did for the live face-to-face trainings just so that it fits the webinar format better. We will also try to monitor the webinar chat box. So if you have questions, please put them in there. You can also just turn on your mic and ask them if you're comfortable doing that. And we will go ahead and get started. Okay. So this is just the training about supporting students with challenging behaviors. We are going to talk primarily best practices in conducting an FBA, and then Bobette will show you what that looks like in the module in Edplan, and then we'll talk about how to use your FBA information in order to create an evidence-based behavior intervention plan, and then Bobette will show you what that looks like on the Edplan tool also. This is not just a webinar for navigation of the Edplan tool, though we do have a lot of that built in. Sorry. But I think Bobette is planning on doing some of that later. There's a quick reference guide. She'll point you to all of the tools that you need in order to navigate better. We like to start with some introductions just so you know who we are and know that we're not just people behind a screen that you can't see. My name is Kristen Perez-Rickels. These are pictures of my family. I've been married to my husband for 8 years, and we've known each other since 3rd grade. His mom was my 3rd grade teacher, which is part of why I hyphenated and why I have the longest name. I also have 2 kids. My son is 5. His name is Liam, and Bryn is 3, and they are a handful, but a super fun handful. You'll probably hear stories as we go through this training because I practice all the things on them, and they are great guinea pigs and they love it. So that's just a little bit about me. I got my undergraduate degree in elementary education and religious studies, and then moved to Oklahoma from California, worked in an autism program, fell in love with it, went back to school and got my master's in special education with concentrations in transition services and applied behavior analysis.
Good morning. My name is Jenae Tindell, and I am a behavior specialist here at the State Department. I just started here in August. Prior to coming to the State Department, I was a special education teacher for 10 years. I've taught resource, I've taught in an autism program, and DD pre-K. So I've worked with kiddos from 3 to the 8th grade. My family and I live on 5 acres by Lake Thunderbird in Norman, and that is us in front of our little red house. My husband Mitch teaches special education at Norman High School. My son Xander is a Norman High graduate. He'll be 20 in May, which is super crazy. Hannah just turned 18, and she's our little warrior. We have 3 goats, Mama Goat, Penny Goat, and Sven, and 3 pigs, Margot, Maud, and Mad Mardigan. Margot and Mad Mardigan are super sweet and precious, and Maud is just a hot mess. Mad Mardigan also loves spending time with his pet chicken, Ed. They're best buddies. And then my sweet little dog, Gus. Prior to teaching, I have my master's degree in psychology, and I worked as a youth and family counselor at a nonprofit in Norman, providing services to youth and family who were impacted by substance abuse. And yeah, so thank you so much for joining us.
Oh, I asked her that too, Carla. She said that her goats are not good milk goats because they're
myotonic. They're fainting goats. So yeah. Funny story about them. Penny and Sven just absolutely love each other. Mama Goat is not a fan of Sven, so she likes to panic him, make him stiffen up and faint, and then she rolls him down the hill because she finds him highly obnoxious. But yeah, they're pretty adorable. We love them.
All right.
Okay, so by the end of this session, you guys are going to have a good understanding of how to navigate the new FBA BIP module in Edplan. We're going to talk about the steps of the behavior intervention process. We're going to talk about when you should do an FBA, when you must do an FBA, and when to, how that the FBA relates to the BIP. and just kind of talk about best practices in conducting and completing both of those. Sorry. We just pulled some data for you guys in terms of out-of-school suspensions. You know, that's why we're here. We want to make sure that we are supporting our students, you know, with being proactive and supporting our students with those positive behavior interventions and supports, and making sure that we are creating opportunities for success for our kiddos. 5% of our total student population in the U.S. Have had one or more out-of-school suspensions. And I've just kind of broken that down for you as far as gender and race. So we just wanted to call that to your attention as far as how many students in the U.S. have experienced those exclusionary practices of suspension. And then in our state, in Oklahoma, 6% of our total student population have experienced one or more out-of-school suspensions. And the reason why this is important, again, is we just want to make sure that we are supporting students prior to, you know, resorting in these out-of-school suspensions. And the more suspensions a student experiences, the higher likelihood that they are to leave us. And that's the last thing that we want. We don't want to lose students. We want to keep them with us and build in opportunities for success and teach those replacement behaviors and just help them to be as independent and as successful and functional as possible.
And all of that data actually was gen ed and special education. I don't think that it was specific to students with IEPs.
No. Okay, so again, we want to make sure that we are proactive. You know, 30 years of research demonstrates that proactive approaches are more effective than exclusionary discipline. So we definitely want to make sure that we use what works. And then as far as IDEA, in 1997 and 2004, we had amendments specifically identifying positive behavior interventions and supports as a way to improve outcomes for students with disabilities. So again, we want to make sure that we are proactive and are supporting our students who are exhibiting challenging behavior.
So I actually didn't mention what my job is here at the Oklahoma State Department of Education. I am a multi-tiered systems of support specialist for a federal grant out of the Office of Special Education Programs. And so what I do is actually related to all of those layers of support in a school building. So we just like to call attention to the fact that before you even get to the point where you are providing intensive, individualized interventions for students, you need to make sure that you do have strong classroom management strategies, that you are implementing those positive behavior supports. We also want to make sure that you, hopefully, have a system for behavior data collection that is consistent. We will talk a little bit about office discipline referrals and how you can use those as part of your data for an intervention plan. Sorry. And then we will talk very briefly about how to identify students at risk for behavior problems before it gets to the point where they're throwing desks across the room and you have to intervene. And then we're going to spend the bulk of the time on step 4, which is that actual intensive intervention, conducting the FBA, and implementing your behavior intervention plan. But we do want you all to know that there are other ways of determining that students are at risk for behavioral failure or behavioral difficulty. There are a couple of universal behavior screening measures that are free. The Strengths and Difficulties Questionnaire is free online. You can find it at sdqinfo.com, I think. And this is all linked in a Google folder that we will give all of you access to. But the Strengths and Difficulties Questionnaire has quite a bit of research behind it. It has been translated into about 80 different languages, and most of those languages also have their own set of research to make sure that the translations are still making the screening measure valid. And then there's also the Student Risk Screening Scale. This is essentially an Excel file that you download and you rate some behavior on there. It also has quite a bit of data. It has quite a bit of data, quite a bit of research. It probably has more than the SDQ. The one thing I will say, if you're using either of these, is to make sure that you have multiple raters. You get better comparison and understanding of what's happening across settings if you have multiple raters. You also help deal with some of that bias, potential bias, if you have multiple people rating it. And then for the student risk screening scale, if you use that one, use the overall score. There is some controversy over whether or not those individual 5 component categories across the parent rating form and the teacher rating form match. So I would just use the overall score to determine at-risk status. You can also use office discipline referral data in order to determine who is at risk. We in our grant have our sites who are supported through our grant determine at risk if they have 2 or more office discipline referrals by October 1st. There's some research that demonstrates that that might be predictive of behavioral failure throughout the year, but you can make your own decision rules for what would be at risk if you use office discipline referral information. The one caveat for using ODRs, make sure that you are providing training on how to complete that form and when to complete that form. We know that teachers are human and everybody has different levels of tolerability. So we want to make sure that teacher A isn't waiting until a desk is getting thrown to write an office discipline referral when teacher B is giving an office discipline referral for, a bazillion blurred outs or whatever it may be. We want to make sure that we are consistently writing those discipline referrals across teachers. And then there is kind of an at-risk determination through IDEA, and it gives you some requirements for when you have to conduct a functional behavior assessment. And Jenae will talk a little bit more about that. This is what the SDQ looks like. This is what the student risk screening scale looks like, and you will get both of them in the folder that we will give you access to at the end.
So as far as best practice, whenever we're looking at when an FBA should be considered, we need to consider an FBA when a student lacks those essential prerequisite behaviors. Also when the challenging behavior is chronic. So if there's challenging behavior that's happening over and over again, it's probably a good idea to go ahead and look at conducting an FBA. When our classroom and targeted supports are not improving behavior outcomes. So whenever you've done a really good look at your tier 1 and tier 2 classroom supports, and we still have a student or students who are really struggling, you may want to go ahead and conduct an FBA for that. And of course, anytime the behavior in question could be a safety concern, you want to make sure that you're considering an FBA because we want to make sure we keep all of our kiddos safe. And then anytime the use of seclusion or restraint may be a possibility, we want to make sure that we are really proactive in those situations and make sure that we are considering an FBA and a behavior intervention plan to make sure that we can support that student before we get to that point. There are seclusion and restraint rules that we have worked on. They are out for public comment right now. So if you want to go ahead and take a look at those. Okay, and as far as IDEA requirements, there are times when an FBA is required. So if the behavior is found to be a manifestation of the student's disability, then you do need to conduct an FBA. Anytime a student with a disability receives a disciplinary change of placement, you're going to need to also conduct an FBA in that case. Anytime the behavior involves weapons, drugs, or serious bodily injury, or when the behavior interferes with the learning of the student or the learning of others. And we've talked a lot in our in-person trainings as far as when the behavior does involve weapons, drugs, or serious bodily injury. That's a pretty urgent situation. And so you're not going to want to wait until that student engages in that behavior again, to start taking data on that. You're going to want to really use your indirect data, do a really great deep dive in a file review, conduct interviews, and just see if you can get a good understanding of what types of interventions may be appropriate for that student in that case. Okay, and sometimes when we talk about FBAs and BIPs, we kind of use that language interchangeably. So a lot of people can think that they may be the same thing. They're not. So we just kind of wanted to point out the differences of the FBA and the BIP to you guys. So an FBA, that is a method for identifying the purpose or the function of a behavior. You're going to be able to identify those common antecedents and potentially reinforcing factors. During your FBA, you're going to use multiple types of data collection, and we are going to go through several of those with you. The FBA provides a really great structure for reporting and analyzing that data. And then you're going to use all of that information to move into your behavior intervention plan. So you're going to use that information that you found regarding the function, those common antecedents, and reinforcing consequences that you identified in the FBA, and you're going to use that to create an individualized intervention plan. So again, you're going to be using that data. A really strong behavior intervention plan is going to include, you're going to include those replacement behaviors. You're going to include antecedent modifications and reinforcement strategies to decrease target behaviors, but also to increase appropriate behaviors. In your BIP, you're going to have a plan for data collection and progress monitoring. And Bobette will go through the module with you to show you how you can house all of your data in the FBA portion, and then how you can write those really strong interventions in the BIP portion, and also how to use that module for your progress monitoring. As far as the FBA process goes, the very first thing you're going to do is determine if a student would benefit from intensive behavior intervention, and you're going to use those best practices, and then also look at if, at any time if the FBA is required by IDEA. You're going to identify and assemble your behavior team. You're going to define the target behavior, and we're going to go through all of that with you to teach you how to write a really great operational definition of that target behavior. You're going to gather data. You're going to interpret that data so that you can determine the function, those antecedent modifications you may need to make, and anything that could be reinforcing that behavior. You're going to develop a hypothesized function, and we're also going to walk through that process with you and let you practice that. And then you're going to use all of that data to create your behavior intervention plan.
We just got a question and I answered it about the PowerPoint and presentation being available for you all to print. It will be, but we did not have the foresight to send it out ahead of time, but you'll get it at the end. Sorry about that.
Okay, as far as your behavior team goes, you must include members of the IEP team. You can also include other staff with behavioral expertise. So if you have a school counselor that you think would be helpful, a school psychologist, they can absolutely be part of this process. You can also include outside providers with a confidential release. So if your student is working with a BCBA or an outside therapist, you can absolutely pull them into this process. Each member is going to have a specific role, and that role should be clearly defined. And everybody will, just have accountability for those roles and what they should be doing. And I just think it's really important that everybody is on the same page and feels comfortable sharing their expertise and knowledge, asking for help when they need it. And just remember that, we're all here for the same thing, and that's to support this student.
We also just got a question about who would you recommend conduct the FBA. We recommend that you have a whole team do it if you're working with the people already employed by your district, because a lot of the data might not be something that the special education teacher can collect because they're busy teaching classes. It might be data that you need your general education teacher to collect, that you need your speech path to collect. You might involve your school psychologist, and they might be able to help guide some of that data collection also, but we really think that this should be a team endeavor. The IDEA is not, yes, I'll get to that, Daniel. So the IDEA is not super clear about who is qualified to conduct a functional behavior assessment. So we recommend that it's anybody who has undergone training in conducting a functional behavior assessment. Okay. So then there is another question about, do you need consent to test? Yes, Ryan, as long as they are trained and the team is on the same page. Yeah, you want your team on the same page about what you're doing and why you're doing it also. So in terms of consent, we've talked to a couple people up at the agency about whether or not you need consent in order to do this. Because it is on the form, since this is not an initial or reevaluation eligibility, you don't need to get consent that will start like a 45-day timeline, but you do need to get consent and work with parents so that they understand you will be collecting additional data that is not normally collected, and you will be going through this process. Most often, you will probably start this process following a manifestation determination meeting, and so you should already have the parents in that meeting, and you should be able to complete the paperwork super quickly. Okay. So the next step is to identify what your target behavior is. You're welcome, Daniel. And so when you are identifying your target behavior, we want to make sure that you also operationally define it so that it is really clear to everybody on that team and everybody who will be collecting data what behavior you are actually looking at. So it needs to be objective. That means it has to be observable and measurable. We need to leave those feeling words out. We can't say he gets mad. We have to talk about exactly what it looks like when the student is engaging in that behavior. It needs to be readable and unambiguous. So again, if a stranger picked it up, would they be able to identify what that behavior is and if it did or did not occur if they were trying to collect data? And then when we talk about it being complete and delineating the boundaries of the definition, we're talking about including examples and non-examples, which might cover the range of anticipated behaviors or similar behaviors. And so what that might look like is, instead of saying blurting out behaviors, you would be really specific about what it looks like for that student. So the student responds to a question or begins talking in class without first raising his hand and getting permission. The responses can be on or off topic. Examples might include the teacher asking for the answer and the student giving the correct answer, or the teacher stating the read aloud title, "This Beach House," and the student begins talking off topic about his trip to the beach. So non-examples include the student responding during choral response. So what would a blurred out look like and what would a blurred out not be? I hope that makes sense. All right. Another one would be tantrum or meltdown. Instead of saying tantrum or meltdown, being really specific about what it looks like for that individual student. So in this example, the student responds to a task demand given by his teacher by laying on the floor, crying, yelling, and throwing objects. The episode is counted if it lasts 10 seconds or more, and is counted a new incident if separated by 5 minutes or more. So this is a definition that gives you exactly how long the episode even needs to count, and then when you would count it as a new episode since it's a continuous behavior. Keep in mind, your operational definition is your best definition based on current perception of the behavior. You may start taking data on this student who lays on the floor, cries, yells, and throws objects. He's got to do all 4 of those things for at least 10 seconds for it to count. You might start taking data on this student and realize that the perception was he always did all 4 of these things, but really he usually just lies on the floor, yells, and throws objects. Crying isn't usually part of it. And so you can refine your operational definition once you have data to justify what you are seeing. I hope that makes sense. Okay. When we did this in person, we did give everybody opportunities to pause and attempt to write an operational definition on their own. For the sake of time and just this current format, we are going to bypass all of our practical stuff, but we are going to let you know when we stopped and did that in the face-to-faces. We also shared onlinestopwatch.com. It is a really great website where you can get lots of different visual timers for transitions for your students also. On to data.
Alrighty. So as far as data collection, you're going to do 2 types. You will do indirect data collection and direct. During the indirect process, you're going to do a really great file review. So you're going to take a look at those past behavior referrals, like we spoke about earlier in the presentation. You're going to do a review of existing data. We have some checklists that we're going to share with you and kind of walk you through how you would fill those out. You're going to conduct family, staff, and student interviews, and we have included family, staff, and student interviews in the Edplan module, and we're going to show you what that looks like. As far as direct data, you're going to collect anecdotal observation, or you're going to conduct anecdotal observations. So you're going to collect that ABC data to identify the antecedents, the behavior, and the consequence. You may conduct narrative recordings, event recordings, or frequency recordings. We're going to talk about time sampling, and then also duration and latency recording. And again, any data sheet that we share with you during this presentation, we have included in that Google Drive. Okay, so whenever you conduct a file review, you're going to take a look at those previous IEP goals and progress. We're just going to make sure that we are meeting our students' needs, that they're making adequate progress, determine if we need to add any additional goals. change any goals up. If there are missing skills that we need to target. Again, you're going to take a look at those previous office discipline referrals. That can probably point you in the direction of patterns of behavior. So maybe this behavior is happening during specific times of day with specific teachers, things like that. You're also going to take a look at your initial and reevaluation eligibility assessments to determine, do we need to get consent to conduct additional assessments? Have we missed something? And then also for those students who are working with outside providers, you may be provided with some outside provider reports that you could review as well.
Okay, sorry, I will respond as quickly as possible in the chat via typing as she's going through the rest of this also.
Okay, and this is what the student profile piece in the Edplan module looks like. So this asks you questions about the student's communication abilities, so expressive communication, receptive communication, and functional communication. And we will show you the drop downs for each of those whenever Bobette goes through the module. But we've included choices on each end of the spectrum and everything in between. So a student may have no expressive communication, or a student may be able to speak in complete sentences. And same thing with receptive and functional. We've covered each end of the spectrum and everything in between. And then as far as personal skills, those questions are regarding how the student's able to take care of his or her personal needs, hygiene, all that good stuff. And then social skills asks about how the student is able to interact with peers and adults. So basically you're going to take a good look at the skills of your student to determine, if there's anything missing, if there are needs that we need to address as we are writing a good behavior intervention plan for our student.
All right, you will also use checklists, likely, probably, possibly, in order to help guide your decision-making on where best to conduct and spend your time for direct data collection. So checklists might be the functional assessment checklist for teachers and staff, functional analysis screening tool, problem behavior questionnaire, motivational assessment scale, and questions about behavioral function. These are all kind of Likert scaley. The FAST has yes, no. Problem behavior question gives you a percentage of time. Keep in mind, these are all perception related. These are rating scales, essentially just like screening measures, just like the screening measures we talked about before. So you want to make sure that you are not using this information to necessarily identify the function. You're just relying on this to look at where you might get the best observational data. So for instance, in the functional assessment checklist for teachers, you have the schedule and the activity and then the likelihood of the problem behavior. And so you would want to go during the times when the likelihood is anticipated to be high, because you're more likely to see the behavior then at those points. So this is just helping to guide some of your understanding of what teachers and parents are seeing, and to help guide where you're going to conduct your direct data. Okay. You can also do interviews, and we highly recommend that you conduct interviews. The functional assessment interview has a form for teachers. That is just a structured interview. Two important questions you can always ask: what can you do to make the behavior happen? And then what can you do to make it stop? Both of those get at the function or the purpose of the behavior for a student. And then we have more of the interview questions on the module. Here's what they'll look like. We have given the guidance that we want y'all to ask the question, but do not give them the possible responses. So if you're interviewing a student, you would say, so in general, how is your schoolwork? You wouldn't tell them, in general, is your schoolwork too hard, just right, or too easy? You want to be able to leave that question open-ended for your interviewee, and then you go in and select the best response later. The reason for that is because if you just let them talk, you're more likely to get really relevant information that isn't necessarily captured in the drop downs. And that's what the parent and the teacher look like. And we would like for you to summarize and describe that relevant information that wasn't captured in the drop downs at the bottom of that student profile screen. The student strengths and relevant information box is where you would document any of that additional information or relevant details that you gathered, and then you would synthesize and summarize all of the information so that it's easier for you to use later. So my example is up here on the screen. I went through and worked through a student called Bumblebee. So he has age-appropriate communication skills. He's able to expressively articulate needs. So we know that there's probably not a missing skill in language. However, his functional communication to express wants or needs is usually inappropriate. So maybe he hits or he points or he's learned a new behavior in order to access what he wants or needs. He has appropriate personal skills and the necessary physical skills to actively participate in the school environment. According to interviews, he struggles in the area of reading and prefers breaks from tasks and enjoys spending free time with electronics. If I had actually conducted those interviews, I might get more specific and say, according to parents, teachers, and the student, he struggles in reading. I might be more specific about what the student responded. They enjoyed spending time with what specific electronics. Do they like iPad apps at school? Do they only like the Switch at home? So getting a little bit more specific in there also. Parents and teachers describe appropriate interactions with peers and that the target behavior of tantruming, and I have it in quotes because I don't have the operational definition in there, occurs during reading instruction and homework in small group, whole groups, and homework settings. So whatever information you've gathered from the checklist, the interviews, your file review, you want to be able to just synthesize it for really easy use. So what I have here indicates to me I'm probably going to want to go do all of my direct data collection sometime during reading. I'm going to need to look sometime during reading. I might do sometime during math just to compare and make sure that the perception of those people that I interviewed is accurate, but I know that I'm likely to get more, for lack of a better term, bang for my buck if I spend that limited amount of time I have to observe in a reading instructional time. Okay?
So we're going to talk about direct data collection next. One type is anecdotal observation. So you are going to collect ABC data. And of course, you're going to look at those antecedents that describes what happened right before the behavior. You're going to log the behavior. And again, you're going to think about that operational definition. You're going to clearly describe how that behavior looked. And then the consequence, that's going to describe what happened immediately following the behavior. This is not just punitive consequences. It would be anything. So if that student engaged in the behavior and received peer attention, you would want to make sure that you documented that. If that student engaged in that behavior and was able to escape a task demand, you would make sure that you would want to document that as well. This is just an example of what that might look like. So we have antecedent, behavior, and consequence. The antecedent is teacher hands out math addition facts assignment. The behavior is Nellie crumples the behavior paper and refuses. The consequence would be that teacher sends Nellie to a buddy classroom. Teacher is working in a small group with 4 other students. Nellie is reading independently at his desk. Nellie starts kicking his foot into the chair in front of him. Teacher tells Nellie to have silent feet. Teacher tells Nellie to have silent feet. Nellie continues kicking his foot into the chair in front of him and sings to himself. The teacher comes over for a one-on-one conversation with the student about why he needs to stop kicking. So this can really begin to point you in the direction of what behavior you may want to begin collecting your observational data on, and can also point you in the direction of what the function may be.
Yes, Stephanie, you are muted on your side. Sorry.
Oh, you're fine. Okay. And then this is just a screenshot of what the data collection screen looks like in Edplan. So as you can see, we have antecedents, behavior, and consequences. So if we use the example of Nellie from our anecdotal observation, we would say that the antecedent was that he had a task demand of math. The behavior was that he damaged instructional materials. And then the consequence was that he received adult verbal attention or correction. That's how we would log that observation.
Okay. So here is what that'll look like after you've collected the data. Here's how it presents itself in the Edplan data collection format. It will show you one condition. So this was your regular classroom, many persons present. You had teachers and peers. and it was an instructional activity, and it'll give you a quick snapshot of when you observed and how long. You can have multiple different setting events. So we have another condition here where it was in a special class or resource room, only a few persons present, and then we can see that data also.
Another type of direct data collection would be a narrative recording. A narrative recording, you're just going to be taking notes. These aren't quantitative. This just allows you to record of additional information, such as when the target behavior is not present. It can also allow you to note teacher interactions. Anytime you write a narrative recording, you would want to include class and task, the time and date, the number of students and adults who are present, any peer interactions that you observe, and how representative the observation was. So was this a pretty typical day for your student? Was the student having a bad day, a pretty great day? You would just want to indicate that on your narrative recording. This is just an example of what that may look like. So as you can see, we have our date, setting, observation, start time, and end time. And this just says the student enters the room, student touches items on other student's desk as he walks towards his seat. Teacher sees student touching other people's property. The teacher says, Tim, stop touching other people's property. Tim mumbles under his breath, I can do whatever I want. Tim does not respond to, or teacher does not respond to student comment. Student continues to wander around the room, touching property at 2 minutes and 35 seconds. The teacher calls the office and asks for an escort for Tim. The student listens to teacher make a phone call and walks to his seat. So this is really good if you need to gather information regarding the antecedents, the maintaining consequences, and defining a target behavior. If you are just needing to gather some more information to kind of point you in the right direction in terms of what type of other data collection you may want to be conducting and what you may want to be looking for. You're going to use a different type of data collection for those high frequency behaviors. Two examples where this may be useful is if you are looking at non-compliance or things like wandering the room. Okay, event recording. We may also think of this as frequency recording. This is the simplest form of data collection. This can be used when the behavior has a clear beginning and an end. This can be collected over specific times of the instruction or throughout the whole day. We're going to document our data as a count using tallies. And then, you know, there may be days that you can observe for an hour, but other days that you can only observe for 10 minutes. So what you would do is turn this into a rate. So you would take the total count of behavior and divide that by the number of minutes that you were observing, and that's going to give you the rate per minute. So you can do a really good comparison of that behavior and keep everything really consistent. A couple of methods: you could mark tallies in real time. You can move rubber bands from one wrist to another. We have a video that we're not going to watch today, but it is included. You guys can take a look at that later on, where a teacher moves paper clips from one pocket to another, which I thought was pretty great. You could also use a lap clicker. There are many, many ways that you could track this type of data. And this is what that may look like. So as you can see, we're observing this student in the cafeteria. Our target behavior, we were watching to see how many times this student threw food at other students. Our observation times, each time we were able to observe for 30 minutes, but maybe one day we could only observe for 10. So that would be when converting these into a rate would be really, really useful. And we just, as you can see, we just use plus signs. You could use tally marks, check marks, whatever it is that you would want to use to be able to count the frequency of that behavior. And again, we've got a video example of that you guys can take a look at later. And then we use this in our in-person trainings. So if you guys watch this on your own, you would count the number of times you hear the word fold. And Kristen always likes to say that you'll get a really great look into our senses of humor whenever you do watch some of these videos that we included. But anyway, it's a pretty great example.
All right, and then you can use time sampling. This is just the broad term for measuring behavior over intervals or specific moments in time. There are 3 types. There's whole interval, partial interval, and momentary time sampling. Whole interval is most often used for continuous behaviors or behaviors with high rates where the responses have no clear beginning and end. And right beneath it is an example video. It's a self-injurious behavior. A child with autism is hand biting. She's got gloves on, but she's hand biting, and it's happening at such a high rate that taking frequency on it would be almost impossible to identify when does her mouth come up, where's the next bite, since it's at such a high rate. So that might be a behavior that you use whole interval for when you can't distinguish one instance of that behavior from the next and the next and the next. Continuous behaviors are just those behaviors that continue on, like out of seat behavior. So let's see. So you would take your entire observation time. You would need to know in advance what your intervals are. So if you have 10 minutes to observe, you might break your interval, and you might break that into intervals of 1 minute or 30 seconds. I wouldn't go super low in interval time, just because it becomes very difficult then to track the time and watch the behavior. So just keep that in mind when you're planning it. You record if the behavior occurred throughout the entire interval. So if your interval is 1 minute and you're looking at out of seat behavior and the student sits down at 58 seconds, you do not count it for that minute because it did not happen the entire time. So because you have to look at it for the entire time, and they can do it for most of that interval and then stop right before you get to the end of your interval, whole interval may underestimate the occurrence of the behavior. So you want to be careful that you make your intervals short enough that you get an accurate picture, and not so long that it looks like it's never happening. You report this as a percentage of total intervals. Part of this is, again, to make it consistent, because I may have 10 minutes today and I do them as minute intervals, and I may have 5 minutes later and I do them as minute intervals, but you want to report it as a percentage of all of those intervals you observed. This is an example of a data sheet that you might use for that. And again, we have this in the Google folder for you. You don't necessarily need to have data sheets. I know that I often would end up with just randomly sometime in the day because a student left for a dentist appointment or something, and so I had time to go and observe. So I may not have always had data sheets, but you can make one fairly quickly on your own. Just make sure that you are also recording the date and the time of your data collection. This was our practice. You can go watch it later. Partial interval, you do the same thing. You take your entire observation time and you break it into equal intervals of time, and then you record whether the behavior occurred at any time during the interval. So if my interval is, again, 1 minute, if the student did it at 58 seconds, I would count that in that first interval. If the behavior occurred continuously from 58 seconds through 1:05, I would count it for that first interval and that second interval, because it happened at any time during my 1 minute markers. And then again, you report it as a percentage of your total intervals. This is the easiest method to measure multiple behaviors concurrently, because once you've seen it once, you can mark it for that interval and then look for the next. It's a lot easier than trying to take frequency on 3 different behaviors and remembering which clicker was for which behavior. Yes. For clarification, this Edplan FBA BIP system is not required. This is a tool. The State Department of Education wanted to make sure that everybody had something that they could use in order to conduct their FBAs and create BIPs. Keep in mind, though, that what is included in the FBA on this module and in a behavior intervention plan are what we are saying are best practice, what we say you should have in your FBA. You should have indirect data collection, and you should have direct data collection when possible. If it's something like a single instance behavior that you have to do an FBA on, like bringing drugs to school, you would rely more heavily on that indirect. But we are saying you should have indirect data and you should make an attempt to get direct data. When we go through the behavior intervention plan, the pieces that we say you need in a behavior intervention plan are what the State Department believes are part of a comprehensive, complete, effective behavior intervention plan. So yes, if you have a completely separate document, if you're working with a BCBA who has their own forms and wants to use their own forms, you can use those and put them in Edplan. Totally fine. Okay, partial interval may overestimate behavior occurrence because, again, if you've got that behavior that happens from 58 seconds to a minute 5 seconds and you mark it for both of those intervals, but it really only happened 7 seconds, you may overestimate how often that behavior is occurring because it just has to happen once for 1 second during that entire interval. Okay, there's that. There was our example. So the last one is momentary time sampling. In my opinion, this one is easiest for teachers, especially general education teachers who are still having to go about teaching their entire class but need to collect data. You can use this when the behavior is not easily tallied, but you want to make sure it's a behavior that at least occurs at a moderate and steady rate. Again, you divide your observation time into equal intervals. So I'm going to go with that minute example again. And you record whether the behavior occurs at the very end of each interval. So if my interval is a minute, I would look up at a minute. Did that behavior occur at a minute? Did it occur at 2 minutes? Was it happening at 3 minutes? And if it's not happening right at that 1 minute mark, you do not mark it as an occurrence. So momentary time sampling can also underestimate because you are looking at just a single second in time at the end of your interval. Okay. All right. And there's what that might look like. Here was our example. All right. Duration and latency recording.
Okay, so duration recording requires measuring how long a behavior might last. This behavior needs to have a clear beginning and end. An example is once Jimmy is off task, he remains off task for 13 to 17 minutes in circle time. If circle time is 20 minutes, then you know that he's off task for a majority of that time. Latency recording usually requires measuring the time to start a task from the time instructions are given. The behavior needs a clear beginning. An example is Jimmy takes 8 to 12 minutes to start assignments once he is given instructions. So these are pretty easy to track. You would just use, I would always just use my phone, set my stopwatch, and just time how long my student was off task or engaging in whatever target behavior I was looking at. And then as far as latency recording, once you give your student a direction, you're just going to time how long it takes that student to respond. So pretty easy. This is an example of a duration recording data sheet. We've got that in the Google Drive for you. But again, just like Kristen said, you don't ever have to be fancy. You can always do this on a scratch piece of paper if you want to. This was our practice. You guys can do that later on. And then this is an example of a latency recording data sheet. Okay, so once you collect this data, you're going to do a really good analysis. You're going to look for patterns in the antecedent and or the consequence that you can determine, what's happening right before, what could be reinforcing the behavior. You're going to determine the function or the reason for the behavior. Typically, behavior serves 4 basic functions. We're going to go over those with you here in just a bit. And then you're identifying the function of the behavior will drive the behavior intervention planning. You're going to want to make sure that any intervention you implement is serving that same function for the student.
All right, and there are 4 functions of behavior. I've used the mnemonic everyone eats. You don't have to, you can remember them however you want. But there are 4 functions of behavior. There's escape or avoidance, attention. Attention is also oftentimes called social function. So this isn't just having a reaction from somebody. It also has to do with developing interactions and pro-social relationships from another person. Tangible is access to an item or an activity. And then sensory are those self-reinforcing behaviors. They're biologically necessary or they feel good. Oftentimes when we're talking about sensory, we are talking about things that are necessary to survive, like eating and drinking. And I also always use the example of, especially if you work with adolescents, there are some other biological things that feel good that are sensory. I feel like I shouldn't say more about that, but you oftentimes will not be working with a strictly sensory behavior. All behaviors will serve one of these functions. If it continues to be reinforced through that function, if it continues to work to get them attention, they will continue to engage in that behavior. So we have to make sure that we are planning for functionally equivalent replacement behaviors that are as easy as the target behavior at getting that function. please read these. Okay, sorry. And then the other thing I wanted to mention is oftentimes you will hear people say that a student or somebody, he just wants to be in control. This is about control, which is fine, but your next question should be of what? Does he want to control a stimulus in class? Does he want to control where he's supposed to be? Does he want to control the attention he's given? Does he want to control his access to an item or an activity? You want to identify what this student wants to be in control of, because that's the actual function, okay? This is just an example of a little boy engaging in the different functions. It was kind of an interesting example to show you what that might look like. So when you are putting in your data in Edplan, we talked about a lot of different ways for you to collect data. If you do event recording or frequency via Edplan, this is the summary that it will give you. It's called a summary analysis. It will summarize the condition, and by condition, we mean the setting events, the location, the group size, the activity, the people who are present. You don't necessarily, and this is just part of the summary, you don't necessarily have to use just the summary. You can go back and look at your individual data also. But in this example, it'll show you, I hope you can see my arrow. Yes, Garrett, a behavior, thank you. That was something I should have mentioned. A behavior can serve multiple functions. And we'll talk about what that looks like when you write out your functional hypothesis. Okay, so a behavior can serve multiple functions. It can serve for escape, avoidance, and detention. You would want to be clear about under what instances is it for escape and under what instances is it for attention, though. So this summary analysis, Melissa, this is the document that comes up after you have completed your direct functional behavior assessment. After you've completed all of that data, I think it's step 3 or 4. 3. I think it's step 3. This is what will come up when you say done with all of my data collection. Okay. All right. And then once you have looked at all of your data and you have all of that in front of you, you will work with the team to develop your functional hypothesis statement. This is just using the data you have, your best guess about what function that behavior is serving. So you will describe the antecedent. When this antecedent occurs, the student will engage in this behavior in order to what? So my just funny real life example is after the kids have gone to bed, Kristen will scroll through social media in order to escape or avoid cleaning the house. If I had a second function, if I posted a lot on social media too, I might have a second function of in order to escape, avoid cleaning the house, and Kristen will post on social media in order to receive attention, right? So it could serve 2 purposes. We want to be as specific as we can with our current data. If you don't have the data for it, don't get that specific. But if we have the data that suggests and indicates that it's not cleaning the house that I'm avoiding, but it's doing the dishes, then we would be specific in here in order to escape doing the dishes, okay? The other example, when the teacher is working with a small reading group, Bryn will cry loudly and call the teacher's name in order to obtain teacher attention. Same thing here. If it's not just any adult or any teacher's attention that she's after, if we have the data to show that she will continue to cry and call the teacher's name until that teacher comes, you know, Miss Tindell or whatever, then we would be really specific in here in order to obtain Miss Tindell's attention, okay? Does that make sense? Yes? Okay, so the way that that will look in Edplan, when you get to step 4, thank you, Garrett. When you get to step 4, there is the place for you to put in your hypothesis of function. I don't think we've mentioned it yet, but Jenae and I worked with 2 board certified behavior analysts in the state. They're also PhD school psychologists, and we worked with them in order to edit pieces of this module. So we hope it is as full as it can be. But the way that it was recommended, we split the functions isn't just attention, but really specific attention from staff or from peers or from caregivers. We've split access to a tangible into obtain a tangible or access to activity. We have split escape avoid into a task command, escape avoid a setting, a person, or a stimulus, and then we have sensory stimulation on here. The reason for this is because we did want to help guide you toward making that more specific hypothesis, escape or avoid what, a setting or a person or something you need them to do. So when you're in Edplan, you will click one or more if it is dually maintained, if it serves two functions, you will click one or more function, and then down here is where you will put your hypothesis statement. So when Bumblebee is presented with task demands in reading or writing, he will yell, curse, and or destroy instructional materials. So he engages in multiple behaviors in order to escape reading and writing instructional tasks and demands. So his function is the same for multiple behaviors. So when we get into the behavior intervention plan, we're going to look at serving that function, not necessarily changing just those behaviors. So in order to escape reading and writing instructional tasks and demands, if he had multiple behaviors that served multiple functions, or if he had one behavior that served a couple of different functions depending on the antecedent, we would make multiple hypothesis statements. So if you have I had a student who bit in order to obtain attention from staff and in order to escape or avoid task commands. So we would be really specific when Bumblebee is presented with task demands in any subject, he will bite staff in order to escape those task demands, right? And then I'd have another one that would say, when the teacher is giving attention to other students or in the absence of attention given to Bumblebee, he will bite in order to receive attention from staff. Okay, so if it's one behavior, but it's serving two different functions with different antecedents, you would want to make it really clear how those are tied. If that didn't make sense, stop me now. Okay. All right, so when we did this live, we had a couple of scenarios. We will have this again available for you so you all can look at those scenarios yourselves if you would like. But now we are going to turn it over to Bobette so that you can see exactly what this would look like in the FBA BIP module on Edplan. Here. No. Where do I go to share?
We make that bigger a while ago. I think that's over here. Yeah, make that big. Now go to share.
Okay.
Say okay. Hit it again for me. Sorry.
I wonder if it's sharing and I just need to go. Nope.
No.
Okay.
A little last switch screen. Give us just a minute. We're getting set up here.
Go back to here.
Yeah. You did not share while the participant is sharing. Huh. Oh, that's not right.
There we go.
Say okay here. Then it'll turn to loose, I think.
So
Let's try
I'm
one
going
more
back
time
to
again.
here.
Let's start share one more time. And now pick a screen and go share. Yeah,
There we go.
Now if you can get yours back up,
There
give it
we
just a minute to
go.
think about that. Perfect. Sorry.
All right, I think we're
It's supposed to
there.
be so easy, you know?
It is so easy, but
Thank you, Mr. Gary.
I'm usually one of those that I'll hit that wrong button and then it start all over. Complete setup. Hi, everybody. I'm Bobette, and I'm with Edplan, and I live inside your computer screen. So every time you turn on your computer screen, I'm in there somewhere. What I want to do today is just briefly kind of go over everything that you've just taken in, show you where you would document that in Edplan and the FBA BIP module up until everything that they've gone through to this point. I will tell you that later I will be hosting some webinars that will just be the navigation of the FBA BIP module. And so I encourage you to come to those with any questions and concerns that you may have, and we'll go through that and really kind of just get into the navigation part. All right, on the main page, I want to show you two things real quick. One of them is as you scroll all the way down to the bottom of the main page in Edplan, underneath this document section, you can go to the help links and you will see the FBA BIP quick reference guide. It's actually not so quick, it's about 6 pages long and double columned. So, but that will kind of walk you through the process. So let's just jump in real quick to a student. I'm going to skip students with you. I've got them kind of set up in some, in multiple ways so that you can see where they're at that point. Just a moment. All right. So the first student that I want to go to is Dolly. So we're going to go into Dolly as soon as I click on Dolly Ann Parton. We're going to go into the FBA BIP module right up here. Do you all see that? So I'm going to click on that. And you will see that this all is written basically in 7 pages. The FBA BIP is intended to basically be completed in 4 phases. The first phase is to complete your student profile, your social development history interviews, identify your team, and complete the observations in the ABC data. So it's 1, 2, 3, and 4. So these 4 is basically the very first phase of the very first phase is phase 1. The second phase of the FBA BIP module is to write the actual behavior intervention plan. That's step 5. And the third phase is to implement the plan and log your monitoring data. That'll be on number 6. And the last one will be to conduct your progress review. So right now we're just going to go through these first 4 steps. When I go into, we're trying to make sure that we're maintaining both your questions up there, and I'm doing my thing, so I'm sorry. The first step that you're going to go into is the summary page. You can move around these pages as needed. It very much is a standalone module, and so you can move around it as real life happens instead of going through 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. You will notice that there's not a check mark or a green or red or any kind of a denotation on something not being completed in there like it is in the IEP process or even in the eligibility process. It is a standalone module, and you can move around in it as you need to. So let's go into the summary, which would be the very first step. When you go into the summary, if you will just scroll down, you'll see that there's this information that comes over, usually from your student information system. It will talk about maybe their special education status. There is a behavior summary, which basically for this student says no active plan is there. There's no direct FBAs. There's not an individual profile. If there were, you would be able to click on those and go directly into that area. There is an incident tracking and a screening that is in here, but really all that you need to do when you come into this page is go all the way down to the bottom where it says consideration for behavioral interventions, click the box that says check this box to mark this student being considered for possible behavior intervention and click save. At that point, that child is now ready to begin the FBA BIP module process. So on the summary page, let's go back and talk about that one more time. On the summary page, the only thing that you need to do is click into it, scroll to the bottom, click the box there, and click save. And at that point, everything is ready to go. I'm going to double check and make sure that we don't have any questions. Okay. Now let's go into the student profile page. I'm going to go into another student, and we're going to go into, okay. Now I'm going to go into the FBA BIP. We're going to go into the complete the student profile section, and this information will all come over automatically. This particular student does not have special education services at the time. If it did, you would see that box again. And this is the information that they went over earlier with you. This is the profile information. You have the expressive communication. It starts at the highest and goes down to the lowest communication skills. And so you just mark which one best fits your student. You'll do the same thing with receptive. Again, it starts at the highest, goes down to the lowest form of communication. Go into your functional communication, seek attention, request assistance, and request activity, object, and food. On this one, you have 3 choices. Does not reliably express this need or want, usually uses inappropriate expression or behavior to indicate need or want, or usually uses appropriate best ability expression to indicate need or want. So again, you'll just mark that according to your student. It's the same drop downs here and all the way through. Again, a lot of this you're collecting on your own, or you already know the student well enough. You're just going in and doing this history and this profile. Personal skills, living situation, a lot of choices here. Parents and family house, foster home, own home or apartment, residential facility, other or unknown. Pick the one that best describes your student's living situation. Are there any visual concerns? You're going to mark that. What about hearing? You're going to mark that. You're just going through and making sure that you're looking at everything and considering everything that may be affecting this student's behavior. Eating skills and toileting skills, and then hygiene. All right. When you get into social skills, how do they control temper in conflicting situations? Do they control it? Usually. Not always, but usually. Meet new peers? Always. Tries to complete assignments on time? Never. Interacts with typical number of friends? Usually. Handles teasing appropriately? Again, you're just going to answer it according to your students. Okay. What kind of tests are they taking? Standard curriculum, adapted curriculum. You'll mark that. And then it starts asking about their academic skills. How are they in art? How are they in math? How are they in music? How are they in PE? How are they in reading? How are they in science? Just go right down and fill it out. Quality of life. Does a student have a condition that may result in any kind of discomfort? Does a student exhibit deficits in sleep? Does a student have appropriate social interactions? Does a student have sufficient financial resources? I had the question at one of our meetings, our face-to-face trainings, and they asked about this. They said, I'm just not comfortable with answering the financial resource question. Any of these that you choose not to answer does not print the question on the form. So if you didn't want to answer the financial resources one, you wanted to leave that blank, then that question would just drop off completely. So realize as you go through these that you have those choices. Student interview. These are the questions that they went over earlier. In general, is your schoolwork, and this is where they said you're not sitting there with the computer talking to this kid and saying, by the way, is it too hard? Is it just right? Is it too easy? You're just talking with the kid, gathering this information in some sort of a form. These questions are available in the Google Drive so that you're not sitting there with an iPad or a computer that may be distracting your interaction with the student. And then you're just going to go back and answer them according to what fits. So you'll answer all of these questions. What is your preferred personal time? What is your post-school preference? Maybe it's unknown at this point. Do you like school? Most of the time. What's your favorite subject in school? What's your least favorite subject in school? Do you like your teacher? Now, some of these are interesting questions because like this one says, do you like your teacher? Well, yeah, most of the time. That works really well if you're in second grade and you have one teacher. But if you're in a freshman in high school, maybe there's a little bit more information that you may want to put in there, more teachers. Maybe that's where you're going to go down to this area and you can write in that relevant information on any of this. Okay, so don't feel like you're held with handcuffs on some of this stuff. You can go in and put in some narratives and explain in more detail what works for your student. Who are your friends? Identify as many. What are their ages? And we'll just go with peers. So then you have the parent interview. Same thing. This is also available in that Google Drive. And you're just going to mark it according to what you hear from the parent. And again, you don't have to answer some of it, and it will not print on the actual document. Put in any kind of strengths that you may have for the student, as well as other information. And you can write on that as long as you want to. You can expand it, and you can spell check it. Please remember, Edplan does not see typing as an activity. They see clicking. So every so often, you may just want to go over and save it if you're writing a lot of information in here. When you have finalized it, when you are finished with it, you will create the individual final profile. It will show up down below as a final. So this is what it would look like. Again, I probably changed some answers, but here is what it would actually look like as the final document. All right. Okay. Now you're going to go back to, as soon as I can get my screen back up there, we're going to go back to the FBA BIP. You'll go back and forth to this place a lot. You don't have anything at the bottom like you do in the eligibility and the IP that takes you to the next page. So you're going to go back to that FBA BIP to get this main screen to pop back up again. And then you can go in and identify your team. When you identify your team, you'll be able to choose your team members. And when you click on that and open that up, these are team members that are in Edplan. These people are already Edplan users. So if you are wanting people on your team that are not, that are going to be into the behavior plan itself, there's another place to bring in outsiders from Edplan and be able to get them on that team. But this particular team is strictly your Edplan users. When you're finished with that, you'll just click Save. Then we want to go into the ABC data. So we'll go back again to the FBA BIP process. And we're going in to complete this observation, collect the ABC data part. And here is one that is already in there. You can start a new direct FBA. Click on it, put in the location. Maybe this is in the regular classroom. The group size, is it 1-to-1 with an adult? Is it only a few persons? Is it many persons or alone? This would be many persons in a gen ed classroom. What is the activity? In this particular situation, we're going to talk about independent work. And who are the people that are present? It was a teacher and it was peers. The behavior that we're working on with this particular student is work refusal. I can view it. I can add more behaviors if I want to. And when I'm finished with my initial conditions, I'm just going to say complete initial conditions and continue. Now I have the choice to start the observation. I can view data and I can view the summary analysis from here. So we're going to start the observation. I'm going to click start the observation again. And then I'm going to put in the start time and date. I'm going to start the observation again once I decide what the time is on that. I'm going to go back on this one because I think I can and put in that it was February the 17th. And I can start the observation again. And then here's the episode time. And I'm just going to turn around and put in my antecedent. So we're going to say that it was a task demand in math. The student behavior was a work refusal. And the consequence was, and we can even say it was just ignored. So a work refusal and it was ignored. I can record that ABC episode here. I can also record the ABC episode there, and I can record the ABC episode up here. Whatever works for you, it's all the same button. I usually use this one, so I'm just going to click on that, and there it has gone in. There's the episode, the work refusal. I can continue to track this during this time. Once I'm finished with it, once I'm finished with my observation, I go down to the bottom and I say observation session completed. I put in the date, and that was 02/17, and we're going to say at 9:20, and I'm just going to click save and continue. You have an end date that's before one or more of the episode dates. Yeah, I was afraid of that. This is because I'm trying to backtrack. And then all of your information will show up. I'm going to go into documents and show you what that actually looks like. And this is what the DFBA document will look like if you do it according to the right time frames. Yeah, I tried to go back to February. And all of it is listed there. So basically, very quickly, what we went through, we went into the summary and we clicked that we're going to start working with this kid in the FBA BIP module. We filled out the profile, the social development history, and all of the interviews. We identified the current team that's probably a school team and parent team at this point. And then we completed some of the observations to collect the ABC data. And that pretty well covers where you document the information that they went over earlier. Okay, I'm going to turn it back over.
Thank you, Bobette.
Okay, so I want to stop sharing. Am I correct?
That'd be great. And you should be able to pull up your chat on the other computer.
That's not
just
mine.
like you did before. Because there were a couple of questions.
Oh, okay. Oh, here.
Are they over here?
Yes. Yes,
Right
I
above
see 'em.
me there.
Okay.
You can make this bigger. Okay. And are we going to share the PowerPoint next? I'm going to wait a minute till you answer those questions.
Okay. So, Bobette, somebody said that when their teachers try to use it, they get an error message, the document is not configured on your site. Please contact your customer representative. Is that something they would need to message you on the message board about?
Yeah, message me on the message board about that. In more cases than not, it's just something is missing from the user end that needs to be in there. Probably that check on the summary page. And then that configures it for that student. So if they're having any difficulties at all, have them write me on the message board. I'm pretty sensitive to this particular module since it's new, and we'll be happy to ask them to make sure that they include the student name so I can look at it, and then I can go ahead and get that. But more than likely, it's the summary page. That box down at the bottom is not clicked and saved.
All right, and then somebody asked if you can complete an FBA or BIP on students who are not currently on an IEP in Edplan. So yes, because all of your students are pulled into Edplan from your student information system and the Wave. They all somehow connect. It's networking. I don't understand it, but all of your students are in Edplan, so you can go through and use the module for students who are not on an IEP in Edplan. We have just been cautioning people to work with their districts to develop what that procedure will look like in terms of making sure you're getting parent consent. And because if you are not on an IEP, any of that data collection especially is not something that you would do as part of your standard practice. So you need to be working with parents to get consent. So just work with your district to figure out what that would look like. Yes, it will be recorded and online somewhere. We have plans of putting it in Edplan somewhere, maybe linked out at the very least. And then we will try to get it on the OSDE Special Education Services website also. Let's see. There was another question about not. Is there any way you could add? Oh, okay. So is there any way you could add how the student responded to the consequence? What I would do for that is you would record that as like a second episode too. So if it was, if the consequence was ignored, then you would submit that episode, and your next episode would be no attention given to student, and then what was his behavior, and then that next consequence. Okay, and then you don't need consent for the file review. You are going to need consent for your direct data because it is not something you do as part of your standard practice, but you're going to have to work with parents once you develop the behavior intervention plan anyway, because it is part of your IEP. So you should be having these conversations with parents to begin with. Yeah, no, I totally understand, Brianna. We showed in our data collection, one example where the consequence itself is also the antecedent, right? Because if you are working with a student and they throw an object and you ignore, your consequence of ignoring now becomes your next antecedent. You are not giving them attention. Here's their next behavior. There's your next consequence. So there are some instances where your consequence will also serve as an antecedent for that next step.
And on that ABC page, you can add another. On that ABC page, you can add another behavior if you see another behavior pop up.
Yes. Yes. So if you are, hang on, I'm going to try to find it really quickly. On that, I'm sorry, guys. I hope this doesn't make you sick. Yeah. Is it there? Yes. So in Edplan, here are the antecedents, right? And then here are the behaviors that we chose from the very beginning that we are going to be watching. I'm looking at these three behaviors. But if I have a consequence and that then becomes my antecedent over here, and I see a new behavior pops up, he throws something instead of any of these three, I can go to view or add behaviors and add another one, okay? So you can, in the moment, add ones that you didn't think you would initially see. All right. So it is to be, no. So for the direct FBA document, it doesn't have to be in real time. You can backdate. Just make sure that when you backdate, the problem that that Bobette had was that she was working on a student who already had other data in it. But if you backdate, you can make your own data collection ABC form. and you can put it in later. But if you backdate up here, it's going to have the start observation time, and then you'll put in your, oh my gosh, then you'll put in your event, and you want to make sure that whatever the time is up here coincides with when that event happened, because then you'll go record ABC event, and it'll record it at the time that's logged up at the top here. And I'm not actually in Edplan, so it's kind of hard for me to give you an example, but above antecedent, there is a box that says time, and it defaults to the current time, but you can backdate that box. Some of my antecedents and what happens after consequence such as behavior is not able to be documented. Yes, so we understand that there are limitations to what is occurring in this Edplan data collection piece. That's why we spent so much time showing you other ways that you could collect data. Also, you do not have to collect your data in Edplan. This is just a tool to help you if you don't have other means of collecting data, but we showed you other ways. So you don't have to use just the data that you were able to collect in this piece of the module. You can look holistically at all of the data you're able to collect. Okay? All right. I'm going to, then where do you record if you've collected data other than ABC? You would have to upload that on your own. So you can record it on your own data sheets, and then you can upload it later as like an attachment. Okay. Oh my goodness. All right. We are, okay, right here. All right. So before we get right into how to use all of that information to write your behavior intervention plan, we did want to call attention to ensuring that you are being as efficient as possible and as effective as possible before you get to your behavior intervention plan, and making sure that your classroom management techniques are all effective also.
Alrighty, so yes, so whenever you have a student or students who are really struggling and showing, exhibiting these challenging behaviors, it's a really good time to just do an evaluation to determine, to make sure that your Tier 1 supports are really solid, and that your routines and expectations are very, very clear, and that your classroom management is the way that you want it. And, sometimes you're going to have to make adjustments. We're all special educators, teachers, so we do that all the time. But this is just a good reminder and a good moment to kind of do some of that self-reflection. And as far as behavior change goes, we have some central tenets of behavior change that we just want to talk to you guys about. So you're going to use data to guide that process. Data is objective. It can show you trends, patterns, point you into the direction, in the direction of the function, those antecedents and consequences that could be maintaining that behavior. So make sure you're really using your data. You also need to remember that sometimes when the behavior is no longer functional, it will often get worse before it gets better. This is called an extinction burst. And I know that that is really tough. And so we need to make sure that we're implementing these interventions and supporting this student, and just really doing this with fidelity. And sometimes we're going to have to give it a little bit of time before we start to see an improvement. We need to make sure that we provide a comprehensive intervention package. We're going to talk to you more in depth about that here in just a little bit. So we need to make sure we're teaching those replacement behaviors. We're going to need to provide antecedent and consequent interventions, and we have examples of what that looks like in the Edplan module as well. You're going to use your direct data to provide context to choose the best fit interventions. So once you really know your student and know kind of what might work with that individual child, you can choose those interventions that are going to be a really good fit. You need to make sure your interventions are implemented consistently across the school day in all settings. Again, consistency is what works. So we just need to make sure that these interventions are occurring in every setting that the student's needing additional support. Any staff who's going to be implementing the intervention needs to be trained. They need to feel competent and confident that they understand what that intervention needs to look like, and they need to be able to complete it with fidelity. Behavior change often relies on changes in antecedents and consequences. So this means that this may require adults to alter their own behavior as well. And again, You know, we're grown-ups, we can do that, we can make changes, we can be flexible. Again, ensure your Tier 1 classroom management is as effective as possible. You're gonna wanna make sure that you're using evidence-based instructional practices for both academic and behavioral instruction. Remember the praise to correction ratio, so make sure that you're praising that appropriate behavior, those replacement behaviors 3 times as often as you're correcting your student, so that you can really reinforce those new behaviors. You're gonna teach functional replacement behaviors. Always match the interventions to the student's function. That's really important. And then work to increase the occurrence of the replacement behavior versus focusing solely on decrease of the target behavior. So yes, we wanna make sure that we're focusing on that target behavior, but we really need to teach that student those good replacement behaviors so that they can be successful. As far as teacher behaviors, you know, that's really the only thing we have the ultimate control over ourselves. So teacher behaviors can de-escalate and prevent intense behavior. I'm sure you guys have all heard the statement that an escalated teacher can't de-escalate an escalated student. So we need to make sure as teachers that we are modeling emotional regulation, that we are in really good control of ourselves, and showing our students what that looks like to have that emotional regulation. We need to make sure that we're always demonstrating safety, both physical and emotional safety to our students. We need to let our student know that we're sincere, that we mean what we say and we say what we mean. We need to be mindful of our words, body language, and prompts that reduce tension. So again, just be really mindful. Make sure that your tone of voice is appropriate. Make sure that your body language is not threatening, so that you can ensure that your student feels safe. And then acknowledge when you're wrong. We all make mistakes, and that's okay. Apologize, make amends, and move on. That's also really good to model to your students so that they know that they can also make a mistake. And the world's not going to come to an end. They can change that and move forward. So while we're kind of doing this good look at our Tier 1 classroom supports and making sure that we have everything in place to help our students be most successful, we need to make sure that all of our students really feel valued and a good part of our classroom community. So we want to make sure that we're creating a trauma-sensitive classroom. So you want to make sure that your classroom provides physical and emotional safety. We want to make sure that we're viewing our students holistically, understand that the interrelated nature of emotional and physical health and academic success. And that's why during that student profile, you can really take a good look at, you know, does the student have needs that maybe we need to address? Do we need to help this family in accessing community resources? Those good things. Choices in learning that teach and model emotional behavioral regulation. So make sure you give your students choices anytime you can, and make sure that you're establishing trust with your students through shared ownership of the classroom relationships. So again, making sure that your students feel that they are valued, that they are safe, and that they are a part of your classroom community. We want to make sure that we always strive for cultural competence. Again, that is another way to make sure that our students feel that they are valued and part of our classroom community. So we're going to want to acknowledge and respect diversity within the school. We're going to want to incorporate activities and strategies that honor each student's culture. We'll want to build on the assets and contributions brought to the classroom and use approaches that align with the cultural and linguistic backgrounds of students, families, and the broader community. As far as supporting students who may be exhibiting challenging behavior, or any of our students, we want to make sure that we are forming very strong relationships and connections. I don't feel any intervention can be successful if you don't have a good relationship with your students and your families, especially students who are struggling. You're going to have to work really hard to make sure that you have a good, solid relationship with that family, that you'll have trust, that you guys can have those really tough conversations and walk away understanding that everyone is on the same team, on the same page, and has the same goal, and that is success for our student. We want to make sure that the emphasis is on new behavior rather than just punishing the current ones. We're going to have to explicitly teach routines and behavior expectations. You're going to have to teach, practice, reinforce appropriate behaviors, and you're going to need to do that over and over again. This is not a quick process. It's going to take some work, but that's what we do in this field. And then again, exclusion and punishment are ineffective at producing long-term reduction in problem behavior. And that's really what we want. We want to make sure that our students are able to reduce those challenging behaviors and develop new appropriate behaviors so that they can be successful. Okay, so we're going to move into developing the behavior intervention plan.
All right, so the behavior intervention plan is just where you are providing your clear, concise set of strategies. Sorry, I get distracted very easily. Your clear, concise set of strategies that can be communicated to all staff who are working with the student. And this helps with implementation being done consistently and with fidelity. Staff also need to share a common understanding of what the strategies look like and who's responsible for implementing them. We talked a little bit about training all staff and making sure that they know what all of that looks like. I understand you may not have a lot of time with those general education teachers or other staff who will be implementing a lot of these interventions, but there is a place in Edplan, and you will see what this looks like. When you are creating your behavior intervention plan, you mark who is going to implement it, and that teacher or staff member or person has to actually click that they agree to implement and that they understand what they're going to be doing. So we need to make sure that we are having those conversations and that we're providing opportunities for them to ask clarifying questions and provide feedback on how it's going so that they know they're doing what they are supposed to be. I'm sure a lot of you have had the experience where you have asked a teacher or a staff member to implement an intervention and you thought you were really clear and something's not working and you have conversations and you realize that there was something that they needed clarification on and it hasn't been done correctly or implemented correctly. So we want to make sure that we're not wasting some of that precious and valuable time with teachers who aren't understanding what they're supposed to be doing. We want to make sure that they have a very clear understanding of what it'll look like and what their responses are supposed to be so that they implement it correctly to begin with. Behavior intervention plans also need to address the same function as the target behavior. We are looking at the function more than we are the target behavior. We are looking to serve that function more appropriately in order to decrease that target or problematic behavior, okay? Behavior intervention plans are also, in addition to all of those positive behavior interventions and great classroom management that you already have and the supports that are already required in the student's IEP. I can't see what that says. Okay, so components of a high quality behavior intervention plan. This is just what we say our best practices need to be included in your behavior intervention plan. You need to identify your replacement behaviors. We know that if you tell a student in the hallway to stop running, they may stop running, but they may start skipping or speed walking. And what we really wanted wasn't for them to stop running. We wanted them to walk. So we need to make sure that we are really clear about what we need to go in that space instead of that target behavior. If you reduce a problematic behavior, but you don't introduce or teach an appropriate replacement, that vacuum is going to get filled, and oftentimes it gets filled with something equally inappropriate if you aren't explicit about what the behavior should be. You also need some antecedent interventions. These are interventions that you put in place before the behavior occurs in order to decrease the likelihood of occurrence. There are also consequent interventions. These are described to increase the likelihood of future occurrence of your appropriate behaviors. You can also put some consequent interventions in place to decrease the likelihood of that target behavior in the future. So what do you do if that target behavior happens? How are you going to respond? What are your consequent interventions? And then if that replacement behavior happens, how are you going to respond in order to increase its occurrence in the future? And then you need to have a goal for your student's behavior. It needs to be identified. You need to know what you're working toward in order to appropriately measure progress. You need to know what the goal is in order to know if they're making adequate progress to meet that goal. And we will talk about all of this in a little bit more detail. So in Edplan, and you'll see all of this in more detail with Bobette, but when you go into the plan, you will select a behavior to add to the plan. So in my example, I have swears, curses, or uses obscene language, and then it populates this box called description of challenging behavior, and this is where you'll put your operational definition, because we made all of the behaviors general enough that we think we covered everything you might see, but it's not specific to exactly what that looks like for your student. So for Bumblebee, he uses school inappropriate language, such as these words that I won't say out loud in a recording, at a noise level that can be heard by a neighbor sitting shoulder to shoulder or louder. Okay, that is what his swearing, cursing, and obscene language is and what it looks like. And then it will populate a box for interventions, and this one has a minus sign because I populated it, but your interventions will be organized by function. So you should be able to just go click on what your hypothesized function was. See, mine was escape or avoid task command. So I go to escape or avoid, and it'll populate a list of interventions. So my replacement behavior is going to be functionally requesting a break because it still has to meet that function of avoiding the task demand. Sorry. And so I'm going to have a functional request. I'd rather he functionally request and receive a break from that task demand than curse and use obscene language. So my narrative is the explanation of what that functional request looks like, because functionally requesting is pretty broad and pretty general, and so we want to be really specific about what that intervention looks like for this student. So he'll be provided with 3 break cards a day. When he uses the break cards without the occurrence of the target behavior, he'll receive a 5-minute break in the classroom with a quiet table activity. Okay, so when they engage, what exactly is the replacement behavior going to be using a break card? And when they engage in that behavior, what happens? I did not mean to go back. And then my antecedent intervention is to reduce task demand. So it's to escape or avoid task commands. So I'm going to reduce what he's asked to do to begin with in order to try to prevent that behavior in the future. So when completing reading or writing tasks, because that's what we had said before was one of the antecedents, his tasks will be cut in half. So even or odd numbers, or writing 2 sentences instead of 5, but his will be cut in half. And then my consequent intervention is how I'm going to reinforce the occurrence of appropriate behaviors. So I'm going to schedule preferred activities immediately following the completion of the non-preferred activity, and his non-preferred activity is reading and writing tasks. So immediately following those, he will complete Rocket Math iPad Center, because in my interviews, I found out he really likes electronics, and he will complete a Rocket Math iPad Center without an occurrence of inappropriate behaviors, okay? So you want to make sure you have all of those pieces. So replacement behaviors, we already talked a lot about this. They need to be functionally equivalent to the target behavior. They also need to serve that function as easily as the target behavior. If I hit you and I get a 10-minute break really easily, you send me out to the office and I'm out there for 10 minutes. But when I use a break card, you tell me to wait 3 minutes and then I can take my 5 minutes. I'm not going to use my break card. It's not as easy to get what I need, my function of escape. It's not as easy to escape using that break card as it is for me to just hit you. So you want to make sure that whatever your replacement behavior is, it will serve that function as simply, as easily, as quickly as the current target behavior, okay? Also keep in mind that the replacement behavior will become increasingly more socially appropriate. You may not start out with a completely socially appropriate replacement behavior. It'll just be more appropriate than the target behavior. So know that as they master that replacement behavior, you can start introducing more and more socially appropriate replacements. So a break card is not something that all of the peers in the classroom may use, and so it's not 100% socially appropriate or socially typical. And so we may slowly, after the student has mastered using the break cards, work toward the completely appropriate, desirable behavior of completing the work and then getting a break or whatever it may be in your classroom. So some teaching techniques for teaching replacement behaviors: explicit instruction, shaping, and chaining. So explicit instruction is just teaching a specific skill or concept in a highly structured manner. This is often talked about as the I do, we do, you do sequence. So a lot of modeling up front, guided and group practice in the we do with a lot of feedback still. And then the you do is the independent practice with feedback. And feedback can be not just what the student needs to correct, but also what they're doing well. So if you're working on hand raising, it's You raise your hand very well. Thank you for doing that. I need you to wait 5 seconds next time before lowering your hand, or whatever it may be. Keep in mind that all 3 of these pieces may not happen in a single instructional sitting. You may spend a couple of weeks just on the I do modeling and the we do guided practice before the student has mastered the we do enough in order to independently practice with you do. Okay? Shaping is a procedure that involves reinforcing behaviors that are increasingly closer to the target behavior. So you're reinforcing approximations to the desired behavior at the end. I use the example of a handstand because my niece is a gymnast and she's incredible and I can't do those things. So if I tried to do a handstand, I would not immediately hit this target behavior, right? I wouldn't immediately do the desired outcome. I might start at about step 2 and be able to donkey kick my way up a little bit. But if that behavior is reinforced, then, and I become stronger, but if that behavior is reinforced, then I can move to closer and closer and closer approximations until I get to that desired outcome or desired behavior. Another example of this is verbal language in infants and toddlers. When children are first learning to talk, their language is entirely approximations. They might start with a single sound of wah, wah, wah. If we reinforce that approximation with water, then they learn that this language gets me what I need, water, my function, access to water. So closer and closer approximations are what we would begin reinforcing. If you have a 2-year-old who's saying wah wah, you might try to elongate that word into the closer approximation of water, and maybe they get what. Okay, and you give them the water, and then they get closer and closer until you have your 3 or 4-year-old who can say water completely, clearly, no articulation errors, and that's the behavior that gets reinforced. Okay, does that make sense? All right, and then chaining is the technique where you create associations between behaviors in a full behavior chain, and those associations prompt the next step of that chain. So if you think of, I'm going to use peanut butter and jelly sandwiches as an example because I didn't have breakfast. So if you are making a peanut butter and jelly sandwich, you can break that one behavior, make a peanut butter and jelly sandwich, down into the steps, into the chain of what that looks like. So take out the bread, take out the peanut butter, take out the jelly, spread the peanut butter, spread the jelly, put it together, right? You can break it down into all of those small steps in the sequence, and then you teach the first step to mastery, and that prompts the next step. So you teach them to take out the bread, and then you walk through the rest of the sequence with them. And once they have, students have learned to take out bread to mastery, once you have the bread out, that prompts you that now you need the peanut butter. And having the peanut butter out prompts you that now you need jelly, okay? And so you teach each part of that sequence to mastery before you teach the next part of the chain. That was in all caps. Thank you, Gary. So another example of chaining is hand washing, which is super socially relevant right now. So you can break hand washing down into smaller steps. Turn water on, you wet hands, you get the soap, you scrub hands, you rinse the soap off. And each prior step serves as a prompt for the next one. Once I have the water on, that prompts me to put my hands in the water. Once my hands are wet, that prompts me to get the soap. And so you can teach each of these singular steps to mastery before you, and then you teach the next step to mastery until eventually they have the entire chain mastered, okay? All right, Jenae is going to talk to you about the competing behavior pathway.
Okay, just as Kristen was saying, as you're working on these replacement behaviors, they are going to become more and more socially appropriate. And that's kind of what the competing behavior pathway addresses. It's also going to give you a template for you to use to be able to kind of track that, or just see what, provide you a visual as to what that might look like. So the competing behavior pathway says the expected behavior and outcome for the identified routine are identified as the desired behavior and desired outcome. So basically, the expected behavior is, what we want to see out of the student, and then what we want the outcome to be. The replacement behavior that we're going to teach is a more acceptable behavior than the current target behavior, but again, it may not be the most acceptable or the most socially appropriate. It's important to remember that the replacement behavior must lead to the same function for the student. We've kind of talked about that all morning, even if it is not the outcome desired by the teacher. Again, this is a process, and we're not going to get there overnight. So we need to make sure that we are just patient and we are consistent, and we will get there. So a good way to think about this is if we think of the target behavior as the basement. It's not a place where we want to stay. So we design interventions and supports to change the current patterns. And again, we're not going to get there overnight. We're not going to take an elevator to the 5th floor. We're going to need to take the stairs and just work on those replacement behaviors and making them become more and more socially appropriate as we move through those. So this is what it looks like. You see here that you have your routine, the desired behavior, and the desired outcome. So this is what we want to see. So we'll have our setting events, our antecedents, and our goal is to get here to the desired behavior and for that to produce the desired outcome. But we're working with a student who is struggling and is engaging in challenging behavior. So we're going to be talking about our target behavior, what that function is. And we need to make sure that this replacement behavior that we're going to be teaching that student serves that same function. Here's an example. This is Mike. What we know about Mike is that he is a general education student. He has a trauma history. When Mike is given directions, he argues, and the function of that behavior is to escape or avoid. What we want to see is we want Mike to eventually be able to accept directions, and then the desired outcome would be to follow those directions. But we're not there yet. So what we are going to do is we're going to teach Mike to functionally ask for a break, which is going to serve that same function of, escape or avoidance. And then just like we've said, as that student develops those skills and builds up their tolerance and is able to, functionally ask for a break, we can make that look more and more socially appropriate.
Okay, so sorry, we get very distracted by the chat box. Okay, so once you have identified your replacement behavior, you need to determine if use of that behavior is a current skill or will issue. Is it a or can't do, won't do? Heard it both ways. So you need to determine if the student can't do that current skill, because then you'll focus a lot on teaching the student the skill. You'll spend a lot of time on instruction of that skill. Or if it's a won't do, is it something that they know how to do, but they don't have the motivation, or it's not currently functional for them? They just won't do it. I totally stole this from somebody I work with, but I use the example of running because I am not a runner. It is something that I can do. I have the skill and the physical ability to run. If there was a bear chasing me, I could run, although I think they tell you to stand still. But if somebody was chasing me, I could run. So it's not a lack of a skill, it's a lack of motivation or reinforcement. It's not a desirable behavior or a functional behavior for me. If somebody told me for every minute I ran, they would give me $10, I would run for like maybe 3 minutes. Okay, so if it's something that they just won't do, you want to increase the reinforcement to make the behavior more desirable and functional. So my example of Bumblebee, who has expressive communication and can ask for a break, we want to make that ability, that skill, reinforcing. So when he asks for a break, we will reinforce it initially. We want to make it more desirable and more functional than hitting me. So you want to reinforce that behavior more often. Again, you will want to make it more and more socially appropriate. So you might start with using the competing behavior pathway. You would start by making this skill. He has the skill to ask for a break. So we want to make it something that he'll do more often. So this is something that you would reinforce very, very often, especially initially. And then once that becomes a functional behavior for the student, you might start limiting the breaks. So instead of you asking for a break and getting it every time, now I'm going to give you 10 breaks a day. And then I'm going to give you 8, and then 6, and then 4. And then I might give you 4 breaks a day, but I make you wait 10 seconds or 1 minute before you get that break from when you ask to when you go. Okay. So you will make it more increasingly socially appropriate, but especially initially, if it's a won't do, you want to increase the reinforcement and make that behavior functional again. So some replacement behaviors we have in Edplan, they're up here. All of them will have functionally requesting this, right? Functionally requesting a way to escape, functionally requesting getting attention, functionally requesting the tangible, because that's primarily what your replacement behavior is going to be, right? And remember, it's tied, your replacement behavior is tied to the function, not the actual behavior. So there was, if you have a kid who is spitting, I had a kid who spit a lot. If you have a kid who is spitting, you're not going to look at that behavior. You want to look at the function, because you're not going to make the replacement them drinking lots of water, right? If the function is to escape task demands, your replacement behavior is going to be how do they escape task demands, not how do they not spit, right? All right, so when you are working on the functional requests as your replacement behavior, you are going to provide them explicit instruction on how they will be able to functionally request. When the student engages in that behavior, then you'll reinforce it. So my example of functionally requesting a break is he'll have 5 break cards a day. He'll use them to ask for a 10-minute break. If you are doing something like access to a tangible or a break, you want to make sure that you are giving it like a time limit. Otherwise, they'll ask for 1 break and they'll have the break all day, right? But you will give them some explicit instruction in here are your break cards. When you use those break cards, you're going to get 10 minutes. All you have to do is hand it to a teacher. You get 10 minutes to do these things. Take a walk or go to the library or the sensory room or use the iPad apps or look at the iSpy containers, right? So you can give them examples of what they'll do during that break. But you do want to provide them a lot of explanation and instruction before you give them those break cards. And then you may have to initially prompt them to use that break card too. Like, hey, Bumblebee, we're about to do reading. You may want to use your break card this time. Remember, you've got those because it's not going to be something they're used to doing. So you may want to pre-correct with some of that also. But then once the student uses that break card, you have to reinforce it for those 10 minutes or whatever that you said you would, okay? You can also do verbal requests, use of assistive technology devices. There are lots of other ways that students can functionally request. We also have self-monitoring as an intervention, and this is a replacement behavior because you're monitoring your own behavior in order to alter it, and this is especially helpful for impulsive behaviors. But the way you do self-monitoring is you will give kind of a schedule or timing on the left-hand side and then some prompts for the student. What are they self-monitoring? Am I sitting in my seat? Am I on task? Whatever that goal or behavior is. And then you give them a way to like time themselves. You can take a Dollar Tree kitchen timer and set it for every 10 minutes. And then at that 10-minute beep, the student asks themselves, am I in my seat? Am I on task? And then they accurately mark. In the beginning, you will monitor with the student in order to have conversations about how they are monitoring and their accuracy. It's not going to be punitive if the answer is always, no, I'm off task. At least initially, you want to make sure that they are accurately monitoring initially, and then once they're accurately monitoring, then you can make it tied to some kind of reinforcement. If you are completing your self-monitoring and you are on task, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 2 out of those 5 times, you'll have access to a break, right, or whatever it may be. So yes, so you'll teach them how to self-monitor. You will monitor their accuracy initially, and then you will provide reinforcement for accuracy, and then you'll provide reinforcement later for the actual outcome of that monitoring, okay? So some antecedent interventions in Edplan, here's all of them. And again, they're tied to escape avoidance, adult attention, peer attention, tangible, and automatic. And in almost all of them, we have non-contingent reinforcement, okay? So that's, so that would be like providing opportunities for escape from task or setting. That could be contingent or non-contingent, and we'll talk about what that means. Sorry, my voice is going. But you can have non-contingent attention where you provide them attention on a schedule. You can provide opportunities. You can provide opportunities for the student to work with a peer on a schedule that may not be contingent on their behavior. It may just be given to them. You can have scheduled access. So that means it's non-contingent, okay? And so what non-contingent reinforcement means is that it's on a schedule. It is not dependent on them engaging in a replacement behavior. It is given to them no matter what they do. So if you have scheduled breaks, you may look at your baseline data and say that this student engages in escape or avoidance behavior after an hour and a half, right? Like goes through the day only about an hour and a half. So you want to schedule your breaks before they would engage in that escape or avoidance behavior. So you may start with scheduled breaks every hour. And this teaches a student that they don't have to engage in that inappropriate behavior in order to get a break. Once they've become successful with scheduled breaks at every hour, you might increase it to every hour 15, every hour 30, and you slowly wean them off. Scheduled opportunities for attention, you can also provide them with adult and peer attention on a schedule. They can be the one who reads class announcements. They can do a morning check-in with teacher. You can have scheduled calls home depending on who they're trying to access attention from. Scheduled access to preferred activities or items. So you can have scheduled access to the iPad kind of at that same rate that you might have had scheduled breaks, or you can have scheduled access to the iPad every day at the end of the day, or every day right before lunch and at the end of the day. You want to look at your data and determine when that access would be most appropriate, and you want to schedule it before your data shows they engage in the behavior, okay? All right, so my example, provide opportunities for the student to receive attention from peers. I decided that those opportunities are going to be on a schedule. So Bumblebee will read the class announcements each Monday and Friday. On Tuesdays, Wednesdays, and Thursdays, he will choose between sharing a Go Noodle video after reading instruction or reading to the class after lunch. And keep in mind, this is to receive attention. So whatever his behavior is, the function needs to be attention function, okay? Because that's what I'm reinforcing here. Opportunities to respond. This is just providing multiple opportunities to practice new behaviors or to receive attention in class. You think of something like choral responding. That increases all students' opportunities to respond in class. You may also, if you are introducing replacement behaviors, you may increase their opportunities to respond by contriving some scenarios for them to practice that behavior. So if you're working on social skills for a student on how they greet people, you really only have a couple of opportunities naturally in the day for them to greet people with you standing right there maybe. So you might contrive opportunities. You might go for a walk with them through the halls and stop in a couple of classrooms and have them greet people before moving on. Okay. And then transition tools, Jenae will talk about.
So another antecedent intervention, we're going to talk about transition tools. So there are a few different things you can do. You'll want to provide those transition warnings. So let a student know when there is going to be a change or a transition that they need to be prepared for. Some tools you may use first then statements. So this may be first reading, then go noodle video for Bumblebee. First recess, and snack. Let them know what they need to do first, and then what will immediately follow. You'll want to provide your student with a consistent visual schedule, and you want to make very sure that you do include any of those changes that may be happening. So if you have a day that's not going to look like every other day, you'll want to make sure that that visual schedule shows that change so that student can be prepared. You may use visual or auditory timers, just like that online stopwatch we shared with you earlier, to show when a change or a transition is coming. You may use music. I know I used music a lot in my classroom, so my students knew that whenever they started hearing the Count to 100 song, that snack was finished, it was time to clean up, and they needed to be at the carpet, ready for whole group math instruction by the time that song was done. And they loved the song, so they just enjoyed, singing and dancing and just that song playing in general. So it made that transition a little easier for us. And then token economy. So what a token economy is going to do, it will help students to visualize progress, accept and work for delayed reinforcement, learn to self-monitor and regulate behavior. So the way you're going to do that is you're going to identify the desired behavior, whatever that might be, that replacement behavior that you're working on, and then you're going to identify items or activities that are motivating to the student. And we shared in our in-person trainings that you do not have to spend a whole bunch of money for this. These don't have to be items or edibles if those are not motivating or reinforcing to your student. These could be, choosing that Go Noodle video, or having lunch with you on a particular day, maybe a homework pass, something like that. One way you can do this is you can have your student complete a reinforcement survey, or you can conduct a preference assessment. You'll probably gather a lot of information through those interviews that you conduct during the FBA process. You'll create a menu of reinforcers for the student to work for. With my students, you really have to tailor this to your particular student. I had students who were primarily nonverbal. They didn't have functional communication at all. And so a way that I was able to identify some of those reinforcers, I just did a lot of observation, especially in the first few weeks of class. I would set up stations of different activities and just kind of see where it is that they gravitated and what they seemed to enjoy. And then we could create a menu from that. This is what my token economy often looked like in my classroom. But again, you're going to adjust this to be appropriate to your student as far as age and development. So it may not look like this, but for this particular student, if they were to choose that they were working for their snack, then whenever they engaged in that appropriate behavior, they would be able to place a token onto their token board. And once they placed 5 tokens, they would be able to receive that snack. Again, you can adjust this any way you would like. So you may have a student where 5 tokens might get them a snack, but 10 tokens might get them 10 minutes on the computer. 15 tokens might get them an extra recess. So again, you're going to want to make sure that this is very individualized and appropriate for your student because you want it to be meaningful. Another intervention we're going to talk about is check-in, check-out. So with check-in, check-out, you can identify up to 4 behaviors to target. Typically, when we are in the behavior intervention process, we're looking at about 1 or 2 behaviors. So what you're going to do, you're going to positively state the behavior. So let the student know what, they're going to know what behavior you're expecting to see. You're going to create a tracking or a data sheet, and we've shared a link here for you where you can create your own. What this looks like, the student is going to meet with an adult first thing in the morning to establish their behavior goal. They're going to talk about an agreed upon reward for meeting that goal, and then that adult is going to provide them support. So they may want to problem solve some strategies to make sure that they can meet that goal. Their teacher is going to monitor them throughout the day and track that on that tracking sheet. And then in the afternoon, that student is going to meet with that same adult to review their progress, determine if they met the goal, and problem solve any issues that came up, and that adult is going to provide feedback. I always try to make sure that people understand that the check-in, check-out adult needs to be someone the student likes. So this needs to be a positive experience. This is not punitive. These 2 folks are truly working together to help that student meet that goal, and it really needs to be a positive and healthy experience for the student. behavior contracts. So for this, you're going to have a description of that desired or expected behavior. You're going to have a goal statement saying by when, what behavior, and under what conditions the reward will be earned, and that needs to be very clear to the student so they know what they're working towards and the time frame of that. You and the student will come up with the reward that's going to be earned and make sure that you match that reward to the level of the behavior. Again, we want to make sure that everything aligns and is appropriate and beneficial. We always talk about how signatures might make it official. So, if you sign it and the student signs it, that student may feel big time and may take it a little more seriously. So you can always sign it and make it official. The teacher is going to use that behavior contract to pre-correct. I'm so sorry. I am so tongue-tied this morning. And this is not punitive. Again, you're helping that student have some success. All right, and Kristen's going to talk about instructional choice.
So instructional choice, we have written into just about all of those functions, or a few of them. Also, instructional choice will just help mitigate or limit or lessen some of the non-compliance. Also, it encourages autonomy for students. And if you give them the choice of completing something in pen or pencil, then that gives them some ownership over what they're doing. You can have choice within a single task. So every student is given the same task, but you have a choice built into it. So everybody has to read, but you can read to yourself or you can read to a partner. You can choose the materials to complete your task, like a pen or a pencil or a crayon or a marker. You can choose where to complete work. So everybody has the same task, but you can do it at your desk or on the floor or in the library. One example of that would be like flexible seating. So giving them opportunities to choose some of those pieces within a single task is helpful. You can also have across task choices. So you have the same instructional objective or goal for the day, but how the student completes that objective or goal can be a choice. So if everybody has to demonstrate their understanding of setting characters and events of a class book, you can provide them with choices with how they're going to meet that instructional objective. You can do a video or an essay or a poster or a class presentation. If everybody has to complete these 4 assignments by the end of the day or by the end of the week, you can provide the student with choices of the order of completion for those. So you can provide choices in order to help students develop their own autonomy and then also limit some of the non-compliance or work refusal. There's something else. Oh, just be sure whatever choices you give, you are okay with them actually choosing, because you have to facilitate that choice. So if you told a student that they could respond to these discussion questions by video or by essay, and the student chooses video, you need to help facilitate that choice, and you need to be okay with them choosing video. Okay? Simple enough. Environmental engineering. This is just a way that you organize your classroom or your setting in order to minimize the likelihood of behavior or to block or decelerate the behavioral response. I always use the example of elopement. I had a student who was really, really strong, huge elopement risk. And we can't obviously block the door completely, but we can arrange the furniture in the classroom in a way to where it impedes his progress toward the door when he's trying to bolt or run super quickly, right? So we may not prevent that elopement. We may not prevent him getting out of his chair and headed toward the door, but we can stop him from crossing the threshold, right? So we can slow him down or we can stop that behavioral response, okay? High probability request sequence. This is written into the Edplan module as asking the student to do 2 or 3 low task demands before asking them to do the target demand. What this is using behavioral momentum to increase the likelihood of compliance of a high demand, basically, something that the student is not likely to normally do for you. So what you do is you give 2 to 3 or 3 to 5 I would do at least 3 probably. You give them 3 requests or commands or instructions that they are likely to do, and then you follow those up with praise and reinforcement before you ask them to do the thing that they're less likely to do, okay? I always use the example of Simon Says, just because it makes me think of Simon Says. You ask them to do something a few times in quick succession, and you're so used to complying that you comply with the next thing, even though Simon didn't say. And these can be really short commands like, okay, Johnny, I need you to sit down. I need you to take out your pencil. Great job. Thank you. I need you to write your name at the top of this page. Great job. Thank you. I need you to do number 1. I really appreciate that. You did a great job. Now do number 2. You answered it, blah, blah, whatever, perfectly. All right, now keep going. Or it could be longer things where they're more likely to comply with your math tasks. And so you ask them to do 3 math tasks in pretty quick succession. You provide them with a lot of reinforcement, and then you follow that up with the low probability request, okay? So the consequent interventions that we have in Edplan, these are basically how you're going to reinforce the absence of that target behavior, or how you're going to reinforce the occurrence of your replacement behaviors. So scheduling preferred activities immediately following, reinforcing the functional requests, providing opportunities to receive those functions. There are quite a lot in adult attention and peer attention. Intangible, reinforcing those behaviors or replacement behavior, okay? Providing them with that tangible or access to an activity. I don't know why we have this separate from minimizing attention, but differential attention is just providing more attention to desired behaviors and minimizing your attention to the non-desired behaviors. You are differentiating where you provide your attention based on what they're engaging in. So if they engage in that replacement behavior, you may provide them with, you know, more intensive, more longer duration attention. And then in the absence of the negative behavior, you might still provide them with attention. And then in the presence of that target behavior, you minimize your attention as much as possible, okay? Contingent reinforcement. So this is the opposite of the non-contingent, right? You provide them with reinforcement based on their behavior. So based on the absence of the target behavior, or based on the presence of the replacement behavior, we reinforce with the functional equivalent. So I have it written both ways in my provide opportunities to earn adult attention. So I decided that those opportunities, since it's opportunities to earn, those are going to be contingent on his behavior. So when he does not engage in blurting out behavior for 1 hour, he will receive 10 minutes of one-to-one attention from the principal, where he can talk about whatever he would like within those 10 minutes, okay? So in the absence of blurting out behavior, he's reinforced with attention. And then in the presence of this new replacement behavior, the self-monitoring protocol. So when he completes his self-monitoring protocol for 2 consecutive days, he gets an entire day of attention as class helper, okay? Punishment procedures. Punishment is anything that occurs following a behavior that decreases the likelihood of that behavior occurring in the future, okay? It should not ever be the only intervention in place. You want to make sure that you are still teaching the correct behaviors and that you are still reinforcing those correct behaviors, because remember, we don't want to just decrease the inappropriate behavior. We also want to fill that empty space with an increase of appropriate behaviors, okay? So some procedures that you can use in punishment, response cost. This is essentially the opposite of a token economy. So they start with a bucket of available reinforcement, and if they engage in that inappropriate behavior, you take something away from them. You want to make sure that you don't get to a point where you take everything away, because if you take everything away by 9 a.m., your day is going to be awful, okay? Also, if you're going to do response cost, don't do it in conjunction with a token economy. Keep those separate, okay? If you're going to do token economy, don't try to use a response cost as an intervention. If you want to do a response cost intervention, don't do token economy because they compete a bit. You can do timeout, and this is just removal of some of that attention or access to activities. So you can, if the student his function is access to an activity, once it is time to do that activity, you may give them a timeout and they don't get to engage in the activity that the other kids are. Timeout may also be timeout from like peer attention. So if you put the student in a separate area of the room where they cannot access peer attention, that would be a timeout procedure. Keep in mind the seclusion and restraint rules. When you are using timeout, you can use a separate space of your classroom, but the student still needs to be monitored and they cannot be held there. Okay. If they try to get out of timeout, you can guide them back, but you cannot hold them in timeout. And if you are going to use response cost or timeout or any punishment procedure, just remember you have to follow through. If you don't follow through, they learn something you don't want them to learn. I had a student whose parents were incredibly, incredibly nice, and they had a really hard time kind of being the bad guys, like being the bad, I don't know, like punishing, making their kids unhappy in any way. And I can't even remember what behavior the student engaged in, but the dad was telling me the story that this little boy did something at home, and so he told him he had to go to timeout for 5 minutes, and he starts ushering toward his room where timeout is going to be, and the son fights him on it, and so it ends up being a hallway tussle for about 30 minutes before the dad says, okay, you know what, I think you learned your lesson, and walks away. So he never followed through on the timeout. So I would hazard a guess that the lesson that boy learned was, if I put up a long enough, hard enough fight, I don't have to go to timeout and I don't have to go to my room. So just make sure whatever you say the punishment is going to be, you follow through on it. If you take away Play-Doh for the day as part of your response cost, they cannot get Play-Doh for that day, okay? You're going to have to follow through on it. And again, it may get worse before it gets better. The student may engage in more intensive behavior trying to access the Play-Doh because those behaviors may have been functional in the past, okay? So you're making that inappropriate behavior less functional for the student through these punishment procedures. So some advantages of punishment. Just keep in mind that it can lead to emotional or aggressive reactions. Think of that story I just told you about the tussle in the hallway. Being told to go to his room led to more emotional and aggressive reactions. If you don't follow through, those emotional and aggressive reactions will not decrease. It may increase the youth's escape and avoidance behavior, especially of the setting or the people who are punishing their behavior, okay? So I may have started out having attention behaviors, but you are punishing all of my attention behaviors, so I just don't even want to be here. I'm going to escape or avoid you and the setting where I'm getting punished in, okay? It may also lead to some undesirable modeling. You may have increased levels of noncompliance. So if noncompliance is already an issue, just know that it might increase. And then you can have increases in undesired behavior in another location where it's not being punished. So if you are, trying to think of a great example. If you are punishing out-of-seat behavior in your classroom, you are not necessarily going to have the decrease of out-of-seat behavior generalized over settings. The student may just be out of their seat more often when they're in speech or when they're working with the occupational therapist, okay? So it's just decreasing it for your setting. It may not generalize, and it may in fact increase it in other areas where they can engage in that behavior and have it be functional, okay? And then the biggest one is it just doesn't teach the correct behavior. So if you use any of your, any punishment interventions, just make sure that you are still teaching the correct behavior alongside it, okay? Planned ignoring or minimizing attention. This is also a punishment procedure if the student is engaging in attention-seeking behaviors. If you minimize or ignore those behaviors, the behavior is likely to go extinct, like it won't happen anymore. But you want to make sure that you are not ignoring or minimizing attention for behaviors that are potentially dangerous or that may escalate beyond your tolerability. If at some point, because remember, the behavior during an extinction procedure will get worse before it gets better. So if you if it is a behavior that is going to become more intense or more frequent in a way that you will have to respond to it, do not do planned ignoring, okay? Because you won't be able to follow through. It's going to go beyond your tolerability, and you're going to have to provide attention for it at that high intensity level, or go crazy. Don't do it, okay? So I had a teacher who hated like tapping noises, drove her crazy. So if she tried to ignore a simple tap and it escalated to like drumming on their desk, and that was beyond her tolerability and she had to address it, she's not been able to follow through. And now that student knows tapping isn't going to get the attention, but the drumming will. So they'll start at that more intensive area level next time, okay? It's really hard to make sense via webinar, guys. Okay, and so the process after you've developed your behavior intervention plan, you're going to implement it, you're going to measure student progress and its effectiveness, and then you're going to review. So you want to implement the behavior plan with fidelity, and then you'll measure the effectiveness of it either through classroom observations. You'll continue to collect data. Your staff who's implementing can give some feedback also, so you can measure some of the fidelity. You may have weekly student meetings, and then you want to review what you've measured, that effectiveness with the team. You can reconvene every 2 to 4 weeks. If you are meeting with the team just to do a quick check-in and make sure that it is being effective, you may not have to call the entire team together and have a full IEP meeting. If you do kind of a quick temperature check and you see that the student is not making adequate progress toward their goal, and you are going to change their interventions or you're going to change their behavior intervention plan, that's when you'll need the whole team. If you're going to completely change what those interventions look like, you need to get the team on board and agreeing, okay? So you've developed your SMART goal already because we talked about that. The Edplan module will do this for you and it'll look better than this. It makes an aim line for you. So what it does is it takes your baseline data. So an average of, this is my example, number of hand raises. It'll take an average of that baseline data and it'll plot it. And then it'll plot your goal. So where do you want them to be at this point in time? And then it'll make an aim line. So this is your desired trajectory. So when you do your data collection and your progress monitoring, you're going to plot them in reference to that aim line. So if we start at, I don't know, let's say that this is 2. Our baseline was 2 hand raises. If we go up to 3 hand raises, that's progress, but it's not adequate progress to meet that goal, okay? It's not on that aim line. We recommend you have probably about 3 stable data points before you make decisions. So you want to see, maybe it goes to 3, 3, 3. And so you see like, yeah, they made progress from their baseline, but it's not enough to meet their goal, and it's stable data. It's pretty consistent. That's what we mean by stable. It's fairly consistent. You may make decisions on modifying their intervention, okay? If your data is all on or above their aim line, then you know that they're making adequate progress toward that goal and you don't need to modify anything, okay? If they are making 0 progress, not just inadequate progress, but they're not making any progress, that's when you would probably look at your hypothesized function. You'll review your data and make sure that you got your hypothesis right, and then you'll look at potentially changing those interventions. If they're making progress, but it's not adequate progress, that's where you might modify those existing interventions. So if they have scheduled breaks, you might modify those scheduled breaks from every hour to every 45 minutes, okay? And here's what that looks like, and Bobette will have a better picture of it for you because I only have one very sad data point in my example, okay? And it will let you progress monitor on frequency, duration, and latency and intensity also, okay? We already talked a little bit about modifying interventions. If it's not improving at all, you will want to make sure that you're collecting some fidelity data, make sure that those interventions were implemented correctly and as often as they were supposed to. You may review your data to confirm that your hypothesis was actually correct or to improve your hypothesis. You'll determine if that replacement behavior has actually been learned or if the student needs more instruction on that replacement behavior. You may increase your reinforcement procedures. So you may intensify the reinforcement, so make it more frequent or give them higher reinforcement, whatever that may be. And then you may determine if additional antecedent interventions are needed. And when you change the actual behavior intervention plan, that's when you'll have to have a meeting. If the behavior is improving and at an adequate rate, that's when you'll continue with the behavior intervention plan. Once they meet their goal or get close to meeting their goal, that is when you will start working on a fading and generalization plan. So pulling back some of that reinforcement to get closer and closer to the socially appropriate target behavior, okay? All right, and now Bobette is going to come up here. Are we going to take a little R&R break? So the plan was to power through because all we have left is Bobette demoing the behavior intervention plan sections of this, and this is going to be posted online. So if you need to take a quick break, you can while we get Bobette set up, but we're gonna power through because we're almost done.
See if we can do it this time.
Okay, that's that mouse. Okay.
I stopped sharing mine at least, so
Okay, so
I'll
I'm
bring
gonna go
Zoom
back
back
to
up.
Zoom,
There you go.
and then I want to go to share screen. And,
And then just hit that share right there. Look at you.
all right,
We're getting better.
awesome. Okay. All right. Let's just jump in here and go to the module. So I'm going to go in and I'm going to pick up for the create the BIP, I'm going to go back into Co. Click on the FBA BIP module again. We've completed this part. We're now going into number 5, create the behavior intervention plan. When you go to this page, you have a choice to update or create a new behavior plan. So either way, you're just going to click that button. When you go in, you have your team members. Now, this is where we talked about earlier, if you're needing an outside member of Edplan to be on this team, you can go to add other, and this is where you can write in what the responsibility would be, who the person is, and then add them to the team. The other thing that needs to be done from here is you've got to make a decision on who will implement the interventions. It can be one person or it can be more. That's up to you. Now, this is really important. This is the number one hang up that I've gotten on the board so far, has been once you make a decision on who will implement this plan, scroll all the way down to the bottom, and you see the team acceptance of the plan. These are the same two people. They must accept that plan. These two have been accepted, so you have, and you have the dates there. Let's go up and let me show you what happens if I add somebody else. I'm going to make Bob responsible for it too. I'm going to save it. Scroll all the way back down to the bottom again. And now Bob is listed as team acceptance of the plan, and he must accept it. Scroll even a little bit further and you look and you see create a draft. You don't see create a final. Until Bob accepts that plan, and he can do it from your computer, he can do it from his computer, doesn't matter. But until that button is clicked showing that Bob accepted the plan, that create a final button will not show up. So the student does not have a current plan in place. Once he clicks that button, you can see the date showed up, and now you have a final button. So when you're trying to create your final BIP and you can't figure out how to finalize it and you can't find the button, it's going to have everything to do with this team and the responsibility issues, okay? Just want to point that out up front. The next area is the relevant information. This again is the direct FBA, the individual profile. You can go to those links. You can pull up those documents again there if you want to. Now you want to talk about the behaviors that you want to include in the plan. In this case, it was a work refusal. You're going to put in exactly what that looks like and what it doesn't look like. And then underneath, this is the second thing that people are asking on the board. They can't find the interventions. It's right underneath the challenging behavior. Here are your interventions. This, by the way, is actually blank when you first come to it. So the work refusal is there. It came over. You're going to select the plan, and then you're going to choose what the function of the behavior is. So in this case, it was to avoid a task command. Write in your challenging behavior, what it looks like, what it doesn't look like, and then based on your function of the behavior, you can go down to your interventions. So in this case, we're going to click on the plus sign under interventions, and then you can choose out of all of these things, and it goes all the way down, which ones you want. I chose schedule breaks. You'd write what that looks like, how long they are, how often they are, and break task or assignment into smaller chunks. And again, you would define that. Remember, Edplan does not see typing as work. It sees clicking as work. So be sure if you're writing a lot in these narratives that you go down and click that save button. All right? The question is, does Edplan send them an alert that they need to accept it? No, it does not send them an alert. They will need to be notified that they need to accept it. Usually they're in the meeting with you, but they would need to be notified. All right. The next area that you go into, these are instructional boxes, these blue boxes. At least read them once. It will help you. And then you can go into the monitoring section to create the new monitoring plan. So we'll click on that. I can go in, I can see inactive plans. I can delete plans. I can create a new plan. Right now, this child doesn't have a plan, so I would need to create a new plan. The one that I want, I would need to select it. You would need to name the plan. You would need to put in the start date of when you're going to start that plan and the end date. Choose your type of monitoring. Put in maybe it's a certain time of the day, what time frame you want to do the monitoring. So we're going to say 8 o'clock in the morning to 9 o'clock in the morning. And then any kind of notes that you want here, you would add those. Again, describing what all of that's going to look like, defining anything so anybody understands what the plan is actually going to look like, and then click Save and Continue. Now I can go into the plan itself and view or edit it if I want to make changes. and I can go in and begin logging the data. So what frequency am I looking for? We're going to say 5. And I can turn around, and this was between 8 and 9 on 310. We're starting it, and I can log the data. Now, when I return, I have one little data point here. When I come back, I can go back in again, log my data, and continue on in the future. This is where I'm going to switch kids on you because of how this one is set up, because I use it for other things. Okay. Go back in. This is where they talked about the function of the behavior. So you have that in there, what your behavior, positive behavior goals are. So I'm going to click on that. Again, you would write that in. What's the replacement behavior? In this case, we went with attention from staff. Again, it could be more than one. You're going to enter the begin date and the end date, which popped in from earlier. And then if you need, this is important, if you need to add related services to carry out this behavior plan, you will want to go back and make that addendum to the IEP. Okay? This does not necessarily, it does not go over and fill in your IEP for you. Okay? Any sort of additional comments you'll make? Everybody has accepted it. I can now create that final plan. All right. Okay, let me go over real quick and show you. Here's view log more monitoring data. That's number 6. That's what I just did earlier. So I'm going to click on view and edit. If this were the next day, I would go in, I would begin to log and edit my forward on the 11th. I can't do it today because it's not the 11th. Put in my frequency and begin to draw those lines. Okay? And then just go back to that and add it as you want to. Okay? Okay. Let's go in and look at Peter because he kind of has some graphs going on there for you. If I go into Peter, I can go in and view edit his work refusal. And here's the graph that's going on there. I can log and view more data. The last one that went in was on the 9th, so I can go in and add more. So today we're going to say he did a 4. Log the data. And it added the 4. Okay? Give you a better idea of what that looks like. Okay. Then at the end of your monitoring, at the end of your behavior plan, you'll want to go in and conduct a progress review. This is Peter's. Here's his data, the way that it is. Let me go back into Angela because she's actually due. Peter's not due yet. All the information fills in. This is the FBA that was completed when the individual profile was completed. This is the interventions for the school year. So there's all the interventions that this particular student has. I can conduct a formal review or an informal review. This is the history. So we're all sitting down, we're looking at this, we're making decisions, we're conducting the BIP review. And when we are finished as a group, we are going to make a decision on whether to change the plan to a maintenance plan, modify the plan, which creates a next version, or create a new plan, the previous plans are no longer displayed. You can still get to them, but they are not necessarily displayed because you're starting a whole new one at that point. And then you will write in your review summary of the team and what decisions they made and what it was based on, etc. And when you're finished with it, it's going to look like this, with everything laid out in a document. Now, speaking of documents, let's go back and take a look real quick at, if I go into documents for this particular student and I click on the behavior tab, usually it opens up to the general, but I'm going to click on the behavior tab. This is where you can begin to see all of the documents that we've talked about today. And then the old FBA documents that you've used in the past in Edplan are still there and will remain there. At this point, I've not heard of any decision to take those out. So that's still there for your use. If you have one in process, continue with it. And you will see all of the documents there. You also, underneath your documents, will see the behavior intervention plan. You'll see the progress monitoring review and your direct functional behavior assessment, as well as your student profiles will be down in documents for that particular student. For signatures, excellent question. If you look at, again, underneath behavior, you can go into the behavior intervention plan signature page, and then you can create a final or a draft from there and print it out. Let's go ahead and create a final. And there is the signature page for you. That way you can use it as many times as you need to for that module. How will the tool work when students transfer between districts? Will we have access to the previous district's log to keep tracking data, or would we have to start over? All of that will transfer over in the system as a current record from district to district. Way too many uhs in my conversation there. All right. All right, so that is basically how it goes in. You have, again, on the main page, you have a document to help you. I've got to get to the main page, don't I? The main landing page, you have at the bottom under documents, you have the help links. And then from here, you can go to the FBA BIP quick reference guide. And again, we are finished with going out across the state. We are completing the recording today, and I will put on some live webinars just on navigation in the next week or so that'll carry us through between now and the end of the year. So you're welcome to jump on those, and we will just be covering navigation at that point. Okay, I'm going to turn it back over to Kristen.
Will you stop sharing?
I want to share. I overshare. There you go.
All right. How do I reshare? Here? Screen one?
Right.
This one? This one?
Actually, you want to share screen 2.
Screen 2, okay.
And then go down, see that bottom share there, right? Nope.
Here?
There.
Oh, okay, I'm sorry.
That's all right.
Tech man. Okay, so that was all we had for y'all this morning. We tried to keep it fairly brief because the webinar format is interesting, and if we record this and save it for other people, we want y'all to be able to navigate through it pretty easily. Here are some other resources for you. The IRIS Center has a lot of really great information and resources, not just modules, but they also have printed resources and information about IDEA. The Cedar Center has a module on classroom and behavior management. Y'all know that Edplan Pepper modules. Intervention Central has some good information also. And then the National Center on Intensive Intervention has a lot of really great resources for you and behavior protocols. This is the Google folder. So you can type in that bit.ly and you should get access to the Google folder. I'll leave it up for a couple of minutes. And we will be continuously adding to that, including behavior intervention protocols. She answered that one. Oh, yeah. Okay. And then this is all of our contact information. Jenae is a behavior specialist for special education services, and then I'm the MTSS specialist for behavior on the State Personnel Development Grant. Feel free to contact either of us if you have questions, comments, concerns. Is yours 322? Okay, so her phone number is actually 522. Can you put back up, please? Yes, I can. There. And I will type it in for you all also, so you can just click on it. bit.ly/FBA BIP 2020.
I'm gonna put my phone number in here because I don't know how it got so mixed up. Oops.
Okay. Any final questions, comments, or concerns? Feel free to email us. All right. Thank you all for joining us today. We are done.
Thank you guys. Have a great day.